The execution platform gleamed under the harsh artificial sunlight of New Harmony's central square. Commander Milo French stood at attention, his spine rigid, face carefully arranged in the expression of stern approval expected of all officers of the People's Republic of Free Worlds. His dress uniform, black with crimson piping, adorned with precisely arranged medals that charted 16 years of service, felt like a carapace, a shell of duty hardened around the increasingly hollow man within. General Kane knelt on the platform, head bowed. Once Milo's commanding officer, now classified as Deviant Class Enemy of Collective Progress. The charges had been read in the flat, mechanical voice of the Justice Minister. Economic sabotage, individualist tendencies, refusal to execute strategic military objectives. Translated from the Republic's propaganda speak, Kane had refused to bomb the civilian sectors of Proxima Colony when insurgents were suspected of hiding there. The collective good requires individual sacrifice, announced the minister, his amplified voice echoing across the square where 10,000 citizens stood in mandatory attendance. Those who place personal judgment above collective wisdom threaten the stability upon which our freedom depends. The irony of this statement was not lost on Milo. Though his face betrayed nothing, the muscles in his jaw ached from maintaining the appropriate expression. He had performed this duty 8 times in the past year alone, watching former comrades, teachers, even friends declared enemies of the state. Each time he had stood exactly as required, had spoken exactly as expected afterward, had filed the appropriate self-criticism reports acknowledging how the experience had strengthened his commitment to the collective. But something was different today. Perhaps it was the way Kane's shoulders remained square, despite his kneeling position. Perhaps it was the memory of the night 4 years prior when Kane had pulled Milo from a burning transport on Helios 9, violating direct orders to abandon the position. No man left behind was a pre-Republic sentiment, considered dangerously individualistic now. Kane had been reprimanded then. Today he would pay the ultimate price for his persistent humanity. The execution proceeded with mechanical efficiency. No last words were permitted, individual expressions being deemed potentially contaminating. The neural disruptor hummed briefly, and General Kane's body slumped forward, his consciousness erased, his biological components now property of the state to be recycled as deemed efficient. The crowd responded with the prescribed enthusiasm, applause at precisely the correct volume and duration, faces showing appropriate patriotic fervor. Children in the front rows chanted the Republic's anthem with rehearsed precision. Milo's hands came together in the expected rhythm. His eyes showed the required conviction. Inside, something calcified, a decision crystallizing from the supersaturated solution of his suppressed rage and despair. "Today we are all strengthened by collective justice," remarked Colonel Voss beside him, the words automatic, a call and response as ritualized as any religious ceremony. "The individual must yield to the whole," Milo replied, the prescribed response flowing from him like the last breath of a dying man. Behind his eyes, an entirely different conversation unfolded. He was done. Finished. Whatever this was, this mockery of civilization, this machine that consumed human dignity and called it progress, he would no longer be its component. Death would be preferable to one more day of complicity. And death was precisely what he was considering as the crowd began its coordinated dispersal, citizens filing away in neat rows according to their assigned departure sequences. Milo had heard rumors, whispers in the officers' quarters during the brief periods when surveillance was reduced for system maintenance. Rumors of a planet called Voraxis, so hostile that even the Republic had abandoned attempts to colonize it. A world entirely covered in predatory jungle, where even the plant life was said to hunt humans. A place where death would come quickly, cleanly, without the prolonged spiritual suffocation of life under the Republic. The thought brought the first genuine feeling he'd experienced in months. Hope. Not hope for survival. Hope for a meaningful end. To die fighting against actual predators rather than the slow, bureaucratic consumption of his humanity. to feel something real, even if only pain, before the end. As the square emptied, Milo turned with perfect military precision and began walking toward his assigned residential block. His steps, measured and identical, gave no outward sign that this would be the last time he followed this path. Inside, he was already plotting the deaths of Commander Milo French, loyal officer of the Republic, and the birth of Milo French, deserter, traitor, and, if fortune smiled upon him, soon to be a free corpse on a distant world. The mandatory celebration following General Kane's execution stretched into the night. Milo moved through it like a ghost, performing the expected socializations with mechanical precision. He accepted the regulation 3 drinks, enough to demonstrate communal spirit, not enough to risk unregulated speech. He engaged in exactly 4 dancing intervals with appropriate partners of his rank and clearance level. He participated in 2 group recitations of the Republic's 7 principles of collective prosperity. Behind this perfect facade, his mind calculated angles of escape, cataloged resources, estimated risk factors with the same strategic precision that had once made him valuable to the Republic's military machine. "Commander French," a voice broke through his thoughts, "your enthusiasm seems regulated tonight." Lieutenant Dana Walsh stood before him, her regulation smile perfect, her eyes communicating something entirely different. Like all officers, she had mastered the art of dual communication, the surface performance and the subtext beneath. "I find perfect regulation to be the highest form of enthusiasm," Miley replied, the standard response to such an observation. Walsh's smile never wavered. "Indeed. Some find regulation so inspiring they seek it in concentrated forms. The industrial district's regulation centers are particularly efficient after hours." An invitation or a trap? In the Republic, the difference was often indistinguishable until too late. "I've heard the recycling centers near Sector 7 have recently upgraded their efficiency protocols," Milo responded, the carefully chosen words revealing that he understood her meaning but remained cautious. Walsh nodded, satisfied. Precisely at 200 hours, most efficient, she moved away, seamlessly joining another conversation cluster as if their exchange had never occurred. Milo checked his chronometer. 2,330 hours. He had just over 2 hours to make his decision. The choice was already made. The only question was whether Walsh represented an actual underground network or a provocateur identifying potential deviants. Either way, it was his only lead to finding transport off-world. The Republic's citizens did not travel freely between planets. Only military and high government officials had such privileges, and even then, under strict monitoring. Milo completed his remaining social obligations with perfect timing, departing the celebration at exactly the appropriate moment for an officer of his rank. The walk to his assigned living quarters gave him time to organize his thoughts. His habitation module was sparse by design. The Republic discouraged personal possessions beyond the allocated standard issue. His space contained a sleeping platform, a hygiene unit, a nutrition station, and a small work terminal. The only personal touch, permitted as recognition of his service record, was a small metal display case. Milo moved with purpose now. From beneath the sleeping platform, he extracted a regulation emergency kit that all officers were required to maintain. It contained basic medical supplies, a compact multi-tool, emergency rations, and a small survival blanket. Standard issue, but useful. Next, he accessed his work terminal and engaged a maintenance diagnostic program, one of the few operations that temporarily suspended surveillance in order to prevent feedback loops in the monitoring systems. The program would run for exactly 7 minutes. In those 7 minutes, Milo accessed his personal safe, the one allowance for privacy granted to officers of his rank. From it, he removed 3 items: a small case containing actual physical currency, officially for undercover operations in non-Republic territories, a data crystal containing his complete service records, potentially valuable for blackmail or trade, and a compact neural disruptor, the same type used in the day's execution, but miniaturized for covert operations. The diagnostic program chimed its 1-minute warning. Milo quickly concealed his contraband inside the lining of his uniform jacket, replaced the safe's false bottom, and resumed a posture of reviewing routine reports when surveillance resumed. For the next hour, he performed his usual evening routine, giving no indication of his intentions. At 145, he donned his uniform jacket and departed his quarters, his stride purposeful and unhurried. Officers occasionally conducted night inspections. His presence in the corridors, while unusual, would not immediately trigger suspicion. The industrial district lay at New Harmony's eastern edge, where the pristine facade of the colony gave way to the practical necessities of production. Here, the gleaming white architecture surrendered to utilitarian gray, and the ever-present propaganda broadcasts faded to a background murmur beneath the constant hum of machinery. Sector 7's recycling center was a massive complex of conveyor systems and processing units where the colony's waste was converted back into usable materials, a physical manifestation of the Republic's obsession with perfect efficiency. During day cycles, thousands of workers operated under the watchful eyes of efficiency monitors. At night, only automated systems and minimal security remained. Milo approached from the south access route, his uniform granting him unquestioned passage through 2 security checkpoints. At the third, he was stopped. "Purpose of visit, Commander?" The security officer's tone was respectful but firm. "Efficiency evaluation," Milo replied, producing his command credentials. "Reports of potential resource diversion during night cycle operations." The guard hesitated, as expected. Surprise inspections were a common Republic tactic, but typically conducted by Efficiency Bureau officials, not military commanders. "I have no notification of that," Milo interrupted with the perfect mix of irritation and authority. "Is precisely the point of unannounced evaluations. Or would you prefer I include your obstructionism in my report to Central?" The threat of a negative report was enough. The guard stepped aside, logging Milo's entrance, but without raising an alert. Small victories. Beyond the checkpoint, Milo navigated the labyrinthine complex with the help of subtle markers, small symbols etched into junction boxes or painted onto support beams, that might appear as maintenance notations to the uninitiated but formed a crude map for those who knew to look. At exactly 200 hours, he arrived at Processing Unit 27B, a massive furnace system currently in its cooling cycle. The area was deserted except for a single maintenance worker adjusting settings on a control panel. When the worker turned, Milo recognized Lieutenant Walsh in civilian disguise. "You actually came," she said, no trace of her earlier performance in her voice. "I calculated a 60% probability you were too institutionalized to take the risk. Recent events have adjusted my risk tolerance," Milo replied carefully. Walsh studied him for a moment, then nodded toward a maintenance access door. 3 people in the last month, all on the same watch list your name appeared on yesterday. 2 were arrested this morning. The third managed to disappear last week. You're either very brave or very foolish." "My name is on a watch list?" This was new information, though not entirely surprising. Officers who had served under deviants were often subject to increased scrutiny. "Level 2 surveillance authorization. Behavioral predictive algorithms flagged your response patterns during the last 2 executions. Subtle changes in micro-expressions, pupil dilation inconsistent with your verbal expressions of approval." Walsh's voice was matter-of-fact. "You've got maybe 3 days before they bring you in for voluntary re-evaluation." The euphemism was clear. Re-evaluation meant personality adjustment, neural reconfiguration that would strip away any remaining resistance to the Republic's ideology. Subjects emerged compliant, enthusiastic, and utterly hollow. "I need transport off-world," Milo stated simply. Walsh laughed, a harsh sound in the cavernous space. "Everyone does, but the question is, what can you offer in exchange?" Before Milo could respond, an alarm blared from Walsh's communicator. Her eyes widened. "Security sweep, unscheduled. They're checking credentials against physical locations." She looked at him with sudden suspicion. "Did you disable your tracker?" Every citizen had a subdermal tracker, military personnel included. Milo had considered removing his, but such an action would immediately trigger an alert. "No," he admitted. "I calculated that maintaining normal patterns was safer until I secured transport. Then they're coming for you now." Walsh was already moving toward a different exit. "Your quarters would have reported you absent during the automated check. They're triangulating your location as we speak." As if to confirm her words, the distant sound of security doors sealing echoed through the complex. Milo's options narrowed to a pinpoint. "Is there another way out?" he demanded. Walsh hesitated, visibly calculating her own risks. Then she sighed. "Follow me, quickly, and understand. If you're caught, I never met you." They ran now, abandoning pretense, deeper into the recycling complex. Walsh led him through maintenance tunnels and access shafts, following a route clearly rehearsed for such emergencies. Above them, security announcements echoed. "Attention all personnel, security sweep in progress. Remain at your stations for credential verification." After several minutes of rapid movement, they emerged into a storage area filled with shipping containers. Walsh approached one that appeared no different from the others and pressed her palm against a concealed scanner. "This gets you to the spaceport's maintenance level," she explained as the container's side panel slid open. "From there, find Bay 94, ask for Meridian. Tell her the drought on Titan has ended. She'll know what it means." "What does it mean?" Milo asked, already moving toward the container. "That you're worth the risk of transport." Walsh was backing away. "The container leaves in 2 minutes, with or without you inside. If you're not committed, walk away now." Milo looked at the dark interior of the container, then back at the complex where security forces were undoubtedly closing in. The decision required no further calculation. "Why are you helping me?" he asked as he stepped into the container. Walsh's smile held no warmth. "Because someday, if you survive, you might help dismantle the system that forces people like us to live double lives. Or maybe I just enjoy the chaos of throwing good officers away. Either way." Her words cut off as the container sealed, plunging Milo into darkness. The container hummed to life around him, automated systems preparing for transport. Milo braced himself against the wall as it began to move, carrying him toward an uncertain future and away from the only life he had known for 16 years. In the darkness, a strange sensation spread through his chest. It took him several moments to recognize it as something he had not experienced in years. Hope. The journey in the shipping container lasted approximately 40 minutes, though in the darkness, with only the hum of transport mechanisms and his own thoughts for company, time stretched like an interrogation session. Milo used the time productively, mentally cataloging his assets and liabilities. Assets. Combat training, tactical knowledge, physical conditioning, the small cache of items he'd taken from his quarters. Liabilities. His uniform instantly recognizable, his tracker still active, his complete lack of knowledge about black market space transport, and the almost certainty that his image had already been flagged in every security system on New Harmony. The container slowed, then stopped. Metal groaned as loading mechanisms engaged. Milo tensed, ready for either opportunity or confrontation when the doors opened. Instead, a small panel slid aside on the container's interior, revealing a narrow passage. A voice whispered from the darkness, "Move quickly. Security drones pass every 8 minutes." Milo didn't hesitate. He squeezed through the opening into a maintenance corridor lit only by emergency lighting. A figure in worker's coveralls stood waiting, face obscured by a respirator mask commonly worn by those working in the spaceport's fuel processing areas. "Follow, don't speak," the figure instructed, already turning to move down the corridor. They navigated a labyrinth of service passages, occasionally freezing as security drones hummed past. The spaceport's maintenance level was a stark contrast to the pristine public areas above. Here, the Republic's facade of perfect efficiency gave way to the grime and jury-rigged repairs that actually kept the colony functioning. After several minutes of cautious movement, they reached a service elevator. The guide pressed a complex sequence on the control panel, bypassing the normal security protocols. The elevator descended further, beyond the official levels shown on public schematics. When the doors opened, Milo found himself in what appeared to be an entirely different world from the sterile colony above. A bustling underground market spread before him, illuminated by mismatched lighting systems cobbled together from salvaged parts. Vendors sold goods that were either rationed or entirely prohibited on the surface. Citizens from different social strata mingled freely, without the rigid segregation enforced above. "Welcome to the Undertow," his guide said, finally removing the respirator to reveal a young woman with a latticework of scars across the left side of her face. The mark of someone who had failed a Republic re-education program and survived. "Everyone down here is running from something. No questions asked, as long as you follow the local rules." "Which are?" Milo asked, taking in the unexpected community. "No violence except in designated areas. No deals broken. No selling out to the Republic." She pointed to a crude symbol painted on the wall, a stylized wave crashing against a rigid barrier. "The Undertow always finds its way through. Remember that." She led him through the market to a sectioned-off area that appeared to function as a trading post for information and services. Several terminals were in use, their users hunched over screens displaying what looked like ship manifests and transport schedules. "Meridian handles most of the off-world transport arrangements," his guide explained. "Not cheap, not comfortable, but effective if you've got something worth trading." "And if I don't?" Milo asked. The woman shrugged. "Then you're stuck in the Undertow until you earn your way out. Better than up there, but not by much." At a table near the back sat a heavy-set woman with intricate cybernetic implants visible along her temples and jawline. Black market enhancements, far beyond what the Republic permitted for civilians. She was engaged in intense negotiation with a nervous-looking man in merchant's attire. When she noticed Milo's approach, she held up a hand indicating he should wait. The negotiation concluded with the merchant reluctantly handing over a small case. Only then did the woman turn her attention to Milo. "Military," she stated flatly. "Interesting. Either very stupid or very desperate." Her eyes, enhanced with optical implants that emitted a faint blue glow, scanned him methodically. "Your tracker is still active. That makes you a walking beacon for security forces." "The drought on Titan has ended," Milo stated, using the phrase Walsh had provided. Meridian's expression changed subtly. "Walsh vouches for you? That's unexpected." She gestured to a chair opposite her. "Sit. You have 10 minutes to convince me you're worth the risk." Milo remained standing. "I need transport off-world, preferably to the outer systems, beyond Republic control. And I need a personal yacht with Centaurian pleasure simulators," Meridian countered. "We don't always get what we want. What are you offering in exchange?" Milo carefully removed the data crystal from his uniform. "Complete Republic military deployment information for the Proxima sector. Patrol routes, security codes, identification protocols. Everything needed to move shipments through supposedly secure space." Meridian's cybernetic eyes flashed as she processed this information. "Valuable if authentic, worthless if outdated or falsified." "Access yesterday, directly from command servers," Milo assured her. "Security codes rotate on a 30-day cycle. You have 26 days of operational advantage before they change." Meridian took the crystal, inserting it into a portable scanner. After reviewing the data briefly, she nodded. "This buys you passage on an outbound freighter, not your choice of destination. You go where the ship goes. Trader's vessel headed to Kalanor Station, departing in 6 hours. Kalanor Station was a decrepit trading post in a disputed border region, technically under Republic jurisdiction, but far enough from core systems that enforcement was minimal. Not ideal, but a start. "I need my tracker removed first," Milo insisted. Meridian smiled, revealing teeth modified to metallic points, a body modification that would earn severe punishment on the surface. "Already factored into the price, along with new identity documents and appropriate civilian clothing. Can't have you boarding in that uniform, can we?" She tapped a command into her terminal. Within moments, a man appeared at Milo's side, tall, gaunt, with the steady hands of a surgeon and the wary eyes of a criminal. "Processing is through there." Meridian indicated a curtained alcove. "Hacker removal is unpleasant but quick. Try not to scream too loudly. Draws unwanted attention." Before Milo could respond, a commotion erupted at the market's main entrance. Security alerts echoed from above, and the crowd began to shift, vendors quickly concealing prohibited goods. "Republic sweep," Meridian hissed, suddenly all business. "Your presence has been noted faster than expected." She turned to the surgeon. "Get him processed immediately. Use the emergency protocols." The surgeon grabbed Milo's arm with surprising strength. "Move! Now!" As Milo was hustled toward the alcove, Meridian called after him, "If you survive this, Commander, remember who helped you." The undertow protects its own. The surgeon worked quickly in the small, makeshift medical space. With practiced efficiency, he administered a local anesthetic to Milo's left forearm where the tracker was embedded. "No time for it to take full effect," he apologized clinically. "Brace yourself." The incision was quick and precise, but the sensation of the surgeon's instruments probing beneath his skin made Milo's stomach lurch. Blood welled around the small wound as the tracker, a device no larger than a grain of rice, was extracted and dropped into a metallic container. "Your tracker will continue transmitting your biometric data from here," the surgeon explained, quickly sealing the wound with a dermal adhesive. "It buys you perhaps 2 hours before the system registers the inconsistencies." From a nearby cabinet, he retrieved civilian clothing, plain, unremarkable attire that would blend in anywhere in the outer colonies. "Change quickly. Your uniform will be incinerated." As Milo changed, the sounds of the security sweep grew closer. Republic enforcement officers would be methodically working their way through the market, checking identifications against their database of flagged individuals. The curtain parted, revealing a woman Milo hadn't seen before. Her hair was cropped short, her face marked with the subtle indicators of someone who had spent significant time in zero-gravity environments. Her eyes held the calculating look of someone constantly assessing threats and escape routes. "I'm Hawaii," she introduced herself tersely. "Meridian says you've paid for passage on my ship. Unfortunately, our departure schedule has been accelerated. The Republic is searching for a specific individual," Milo surmised, now dressed in the nondescript civilian clothing. "Me." Hawaii's lips thinned. "A military commander who disappeared during the night, taking classified data with him. Half the security forces on New Harmony are looking for you." There was no accusation in her tone, merely pragmatic assessment. "We need to move now through the maintenance tunnels. My ship is docked in Bay 94 as legitimate cargo haulers with proper documentation. If we reach it before they connect you to us, we might still make orbit." The surgeon handed Milo a small case. "Identity documents. You're now Elliot Varn, agricultural specialist from the Proxima colonies, traveling to Kalinar Station to assess hydroponic equipment purchases. Memorize the details while you move." Hawaii led Milo through a back exit from the alcove into a network of tunnels even more crude than those he'd traveled through earlier. These were clearly not official maintenance passages, but excavated shortcuts created by the undertow community. "The sweep is pushing people toward the main exits where they can be processed individually," Hawaii explained as they moved. "We're going in the opposite direction, toward the service bays where my crew is finishing the loading process." "How many in your crew?" Milo asked, automatically assessing tactical variables. "3, including me," Hawaii replied. "Small enough to be overlooked, large enough to handle necessary operations. We transport specialized cargo between systems, sometimes legitimate, sometimes not. The Republic considers us a minor smuggling operation, not worth significant resources to intercept." "And now?" Hawaii's expression hardened. "Now we're transporting a high-value fugitive with classified information. If they connect you to us before we reach jump space, they'll blast us into atoms rather than let you escape." They emerged from the tunnels into a maintenance bay where cargo loaders were transferring the last containers into a small, battered-looking freighter. Despite its worn exterior, Milo recognized the ship as a Corvus-class transport, ostensibly a commercial hauler, but built on a retired military frame with hidden compartments and enhanced engine capacity. The Raven's Fall, Hawaii introduced with a hint of pride. Not pretty, but she'll outrun a Republic cruiser if necessary. They approached carefully, using the cargo loading activity as cover. 2 crew members, a muscular man with elaborate facial tattoos and a slight, androgynous figure with obvious cybernetic enhancements, worked efficiently, appearing completely legitimate to any observer. "That's Brick and Sci-Fi," Hawaii nodded toward them. "They know we're taking on an additional passenger. They don't know who you are, and they don't need to." As they neared the ship's cargo ramp, a security alert blared throughout the bay. Automated doors began to close as docking clamps engaged, the standard lockdown procedure when security threats were detected. "They've found your tracker's actual location," Hawaii realized. "We've got minutes, maybe less." She activated her communicator. "Cipher, override protocol 6. Brick, prepare for emergency departure." Without waiting for confirmation, she grabbed Milo's arm and broke into a run toward the ship. The crew responded instantly, Cipher sliding beneath a console to access override circuits while Brick disappeared up the ramp, presumably to start the engines. They were halfway to the ship when the first security officers appeared at the bay entrance, weapons drawn. "Halt! This bay is under lockdown by order of the People's Republic." Hawaii didn't slow. "When we reach the ramp, drop and roll left," she instructed Milo in a low voice. "Make yourself as small a target as possible." The security officers began to advance, their weapons trained on the running figures. "Final warning! Stand down or we will open fire!" The ship's engines roared to life, the sudden blast of energy momentarily disorienting the security team. In that instant of confusion, Hawaii drew a concealed weapon from her jacket. A compact neural disruptor, similar to the one Milo had taken from his quarters. "Now!" she shouted as they reached the ramp. Milo dropped and rolled as instructed, just as Hawaii fired a series of rapid bursts. The disruptor wasn't lethal at this distance, but the neural shock sent the front line of officers staggering backward into their companions. The confusion bought them seconds. Hawaii dragged Milo up the ramp, slapping the control panel to close it behind them. "Cipher, get us clearance to launch," she shouted as they stumbled into the cargo bay. "Working on it," came the reply from the ship's communications station. "They've locked down all departure protocols." Hawaii pushed Milo toward the crew quarters. "Strap in anywhere, this'll not be a smooth exit." She sprinted toward the cockpit, leaving Milo to secure himself in a jump seat along the corridor. Through the ship's vibrations, he felt the increasing power of the engines fighting against the docking clamps. The internal communications crackled. "Clearance protocols aren't responding," Cipher reported. "They've manually overridden the system." "Then we do this the hard way," Hawaii's voice responded. "Brick, full power to the ventral thrusters on my mark. Cipher, divert all non-essential power to shields." Milo tightened his restraints, recognizing the desperate strategy. They were going to force their way out, potentially damaging both the ship and the docking bay in the process. Such an action wouldn't just mark them as smugglers, it would classify them as active hostiles against the Republic. The ship shuddered as the engines strained against the docking clamps. Metal groaned in protest, and warning alarms blared throughout the vessel. "Mark!" Hawaii commanded. The subsequent acceleration slammed Milo back into his seat as the ship tore free from its restraints. The scream of tearing metal was followed by the distinctive whine of security cannons activating. "Incoming fire," Cipher warned. "Port defense batteries engaging." The ship lurched violently to starboard, evading the first volley of security fire. Through the small viewport near his seat, Milo glimpsed the docking bay receding as the Raven's Fall climbed rapidly into New Harmony's sky. "Republic cruiser deploying from orbital station," Brick reported, his deep voice surprisingly calm. "Intercept course calculated. We need 3 minutes to reach jump distance," Hawaii responded. "Evasive pattern Delta. Use the commercial lanes for cover." The ship banked sharply, diving to skim just above the colony's transportation corridors, where civilian vessels provided obstacles for pursuers. Milo felt the familiar sensations of combat maneuvering, the thrust of acceleration, the momentary weightlessness of descent, the pressure of high-G turns. Despite the circumstances, a part of him appreciated the pilot's skill. "Cipher, status on pursuit?" Hawaii demanded. "2 security cutters on direct intercept, cruiser moving to blockade position near jump threshold." A pause. "Commander, they're deploying a wide dispersal EMP net." A tactic Milo recognized from his own training, designed to disable escaping vessels without destroying them. If they hit the net, the ship's systems would fail, leaving them helpless to be boarded and captured. Without considering the consequences, Milo unstrapped from his seat and made his way toward the cockpit, bracing against the walls as the ship continued its evasive maneuvers. He found Hawaii and Brick working in perfect coordination, hands flying over controls. "The EMP net has a configuration weakness," he announced. "Republic security vessels generate the field with a synchronized pulse from multiple emitters. If you can disrupt the synchronization with a focused electromagnetic burst..." Hawaii shot him a look of surprise mixed with suspicion. And how exactly would a humble agricultural specialist know Republic military tactics? "He wouldn't," Milo acknowledged. "But a Republic commander would. You can trust me or not, but in approximately 40 seconds that net will deploy, and our options will disappear." Hawaii and Brick exchanged a glance, then Hawaii nodded sharply. "Cipher, configure a focused EM pulse, directed at coordinates I'm sending now. Brick, prepare to accelerate through the gap the moment the net destabilizes. This will drain our secondary power reserves," Cipher warned through the comm. "Better than being captured," Hawaii responded. "Execute on my mark. 3, 2, 1, mark." The ship shuddered as it released the electromagnetic pulse. Through the viewport, Milo saw the invisible net become momentarily visible, as energy cascaded across its structure, then fracture as the synchronization failed. Brick didn't hesitate, ramming the throttle forward to send the ship hurtling through the disrupted section. "Jump threshold in 15 seconds, he announced. "Republic cruiser adjusting position," Cipher reported. "They're bringing main weapons online." Hawaii's hands tightened on the controls. "Prepare for emergency jump. Navigation coordinates locked?" "Confirmed," Brick responded. "Jumping in 5, 4... The cruiser fired. Energy weapons lanced through space, grazing the Ravensfall's port side. Alarms blared as damage reports flooded the system. 3, 2, 1... Space distorted around them, the stars stretching into lines as the jump drive engaged. For a sickening moment, reality seemed to fold in upon itself, then snapped back as they entered jump space, leaving New Harmony and its pursuers behind. The cockpit fell silent except for the hum of systems and the occasional spark from damaged circuits. Hawaii let out a long, controlled breath, then turned to face Milo. "So," she said, her voice deceptively calm, "an agricultural specialist who knows Republic military tactics and carries classified information? I think it's time we had an honest conversation about who exactly I've got on my ship, Commander." The Ravensfall drifted in jump space, its systems powered down to essential functions only. The damage from their escape had been mostly superficial, but several key systems required repairs before they could risk returning to normal space. The crew had gathered in the small common area that doubled as a mess hall, the atmosphere tense with unspoken questions. Milo sat across from Hawaii, who had stripped off her flight jacket to reveal arms covered in the distinctive scarring of someone who had survived extensive time in radiation-contaminated environment. Brick and Cipher flanked her, their postures suggesting both curiosity and caution. "Let's start with the truth," Hawaii said, placing her neural disruptor on the table between them, a clear reminder of the power dynamic. "Who are you, and why is the Republic so interested in recovering you specifically?" Milo considered his options briefly, then opted for honesty. Deception would only create complications later. "Commander Milo French, formerly of the Republic's 7th Fleet Tactical Division," he stated. Until yesterday, a loyal officer with 16 years of service, now a deserter carrying sensitive military information. Cypher whistled softly. That explains the cruiser. They don't deploy those for ordinary smugglers. What changed? Hawaii asked, her gaze steady. 16 years is a long time to suddenly develop a conscience. The question cut closer than she likely intended. Milo found himself answering with unexpected candor. I watched them execute my former commanding officer yesterday, General Kane. His crime was refusing to bomb civilians. Milo's voice remained level, but something in his eyes shifted. He saved my life once, violated protocols to pull me from a burning transport. Yesterday I stood at attention and applauded his execution as required. He looked down at his hands, surprised to find them steady despite the admission. 16 years of compromise, 16 years of justifying atrocities in the name of collective good. Yesterday I realized I'd become something I couldn't recognize anymore. Hawaii studied him, her expression unreadable. So this is what? Redemption? Atonement? No, Milo replied with sudden clarity. This is suicide. The blunt admission silenced the room. Even Brick, whose stoic demeanor had remained unchanged throughout the confrontation, raised an eyebrow. I'm not seeking forgiveness or a new life, Milo continued. I'm looking for Voraxis. The name hung in the air like a curse. Cypher visibly tensed, while Hawaii's expression hardened. Voraxis is a myth, she stated flatly. A story to frighten children. No, countered Brick, speaking for the first time since Milo had entered the common area. His deep voice rumbled with certainty. It's real. My brother was part of the last Republic expedition. 23 ships went in. None returned. No distress signals, no debris, just silence. Hawaii shot him a warning glance, but Brick continued. The Republic classified all information about the planet, removed it from navigation charts, declared the entire system restricted under penalty of immediate termination. Precisely why it's the perfect destination, Milo said. No one follows, no extradition, no Republic, and no survival, Hawaii pointed out. If the stories are true, the entire planet is covered in predatory jungle. Even the plants hunt humans. A quick death is preferable to slow suffocation under the Republic, Milo replied. Or the alternative, re-education until nothing remains of who I was. Cypher leaned forward, cybernetic eyes scanning Milo with obvious fascination. You're serious? You want us to take you to a death world? I want transport as close as possible, Milo clarified. I understand the risks. Hawaii stood abruptly, pacing the small confines of the common area. This is insane. We're contracted to deliver you to Kalinar Station. After that, your suicidal plans are your own business. The data crystal I provided is worth more than passage to Kalinar, Milo countered. Much more. You know it and I know it. Even if we wanted to help you, Hawaii argued, Voraxis is beyond the range of a ship this size. We'd need to refuel multiple times, navigate through restricted space, and risk Republic interdiction at every jump point. And yet, Milo observed quietly, you haven't said it's impossible. Hawaii stopped pacing, exchanging glances with her crew. Some unspoken communication passed between them, years of partnership condensed into subtle expression. There's a course, Brick admitted reluctantly, through the Scylla Nebula using the gravity wells of collapsed stars to extend jump distances. Dangerous, but possible. Rick! Hawaii's voice held warning and surprise. The big man shrugged. He deserves the truth, Captain. Besides, he's already given us enough information to make us primary targets for Republic forces. We're committed now, whether we like it or not. A tense silence fell over the group. Milo waited, understanding that pushing too hard would only strengthen resistance. These people operated on the margins, surviving through caution and calculation. They wouldn't be swayed by emotional appeals. Finally, Hawaii returned to her seat, fingers drumming against the tabletop. Even if, and this is a massive if, we considered this, the payment would need to reflect the extreme risk. Name your price, Milo replied simply. The crystal buys you passage to Kalinar, Hawaii stated. For Voraxis, we'd need something worth potentially losing our ship, our freedom, and possibly our lives. Milo had anticipated this moment. From within his jacket, he removed the small neural disruptor he'd taken from his quarters. Unlike the non-lethal variant Hawaii had used in the spaceport, this was a military-grade weapon, compact but deadly efficient. This is a prototype, he explained, placing it on the table. Personal defense weapon designed for high-ranking Republic officers, unregistered, untraceable, and capable of penetrating standard security screens. One of only 20 in existence. Cypher's eyes widened. Oh, that's worth more than the ship. To the right buyer, yes, Milo agreed. Additionally, I can provide access codes to Republic supply depots in 3 systems, automated facilities, minimal personnel, enough fuel cells and provisions to keep this ship running for years without risky commercial transactions. Hawaii picked up the disruptor, examining it with expert eyes. And why would a loyal Republic commander happen to be carrying an unregistered weapon and memorized access codes to supply depots? Planning your desertion for some time, were you? Insurance, Milo admitted. The Republic rewards loyalty until it doesn't. I've seen too many officers discarded when convenient. The weapon was for last resorts. The codes were a contingency I never expected to use. Hawaii returned the weapon to the table, her decision visibly forming. We'll take you as far as the Meridian outpost in the Scylla Nebula. It's the last refueling station before the restricted zone. From there, you'd need to secure separate transport to Voraxis itself. It wasn't everything Milo wanted, but it was further than he'd expected. Acceptable. When do we depart? We're already underway, Hawaii reminded him dryly. But we need to make repairs before exiting jump space. Cypher estimates 6 hours. After that, we'll need to make at least 2 more jumps to reach the nebula. Assuming we avoid Republic patrols, we should reach Meridian Outpost in approximately 4 days. She stood, signaling the end of the negotiation. Brick will show you to a cabin. It's small but private. I suggest you rest while you can. Once we return to normal space, things get complicated. She paused, studying him with renewed intensity. And, Commander French, if this turns out to be an elaborate Republic scheme to infiltrate smuggling networks, know that airlocks malfunction with alarming frequency on this ship. The threat was clear and entirely expected. Milo nodded his understanding. If I were still working for the Republic, you'd already be in custody, but your caution is justified. Brick led him to a small cabin tucked between cargo holds. As promised, it was minimal. A narrow bunk, a storage compartment, and barely enough floor space to stand. Still, after years in Republic officer quarters designed to provide precisely calculated sleeping efficiency, the cramped space felt almost luxurious in its lack of surveillance devices. Captain rarely takes on passengers, Brick commented as he showed Milo how to operate the environmental controls. Especially not ones that bring Republic cruisers down on us. I appreciate the risk you're taking, Milo replied. Brick studied him silently for a moment. My brother said Voraxis was beautiful from orbit. Like a perfect green jewel, he sent one transmission after they landed. The big man's expression darkened. Just screaming. Then, nothing. Without waiting for a response, Brick left, the door sliding shut behind him with a pneumatic hiss. Alone for the first time since his escape, Milo sat on the edge of the bunk, the reality of his situation finally sinking in. In less than 24 hours, he had transformed from a respected Republic commander to a fugitive on a smuggler's vessel. Everything familiar, his quarters, his duties, the rigid structure that had defined his existence, was gone. He should have felt terror, or at minimum anxiety. Instead, as he stretched out on the narrow bunk, a profound sense of calm settled over him. For the first time in 16 years, every breath felt genuinely his own, not measured against Republic respiratory efficiency standards. Every thought flowed without the internal censorship that had become second nature. He was free, And if that freedom led to death on a distant jungle world, at least it would be a death of his choosing, not one prescribed by bureaucratic calculation. Milo closed his eyes, allowing himself the luxury of unregulated sleep, no scheduled wake time, no performance metrics to meet upon rising. Whatever awaited him at Meridian Outpost or beyond, for these few hours he would simply exist. As the ship's fume lulled him toward unconsciousness, his last coherent thought was not of the Republic he had abandoned or the uncertain future ahead, but of General Kane. "I understand now," he whispered to the memory of his former commander. "Some principles are worth dying for." For the first time in years, Milo French slept without dreams of duty or collective obligation. Instead, he dreamed of a green jewel floating in space, waiting. 4 days later, the Raven's Fall approached Meridian Outpost, a ramshackle collection of interconnected habitation modules, fuel tanks, and docking structures, floating at the edge of the Scylla Nebula. Originally constructed as a Republic research station, it had been abandoned during budget reallocations and subsequently claimed by various independent operators who maintained it as a crucial waypoint for ships traveling through this dangerous region of space. The journey had been tense but uneventful. They had encountered a Republic patrol near the Helios Junction but avoided detection by powering down and drifting through the shadow of a cometary debris field. The remainder of their route had taken them through increasingly sparse territories where Republic presence was minimal or non-existent. Milo stood on the bridge as Hawaii guided the ship toward a docking port on the outpost's southern arm. The nebula dominated the viewport, a vast swirling mass of illuminated gas and dust that distorted sensor readings and made navigation treacherous. Somewhere beyond that glowing cloud lay Voraxis, though no official charts acknowledged its existence. "Meridian Control, this is Raven's Fall requesting docking clearance, carrying mixed cargo and 1 passenger for transfer." The response came through a burst of static. "Raven's Fall, clearance granted for Bay 12. Be advised, Republic activity reported in adjacent sectors. Recommend minimal stay duration." Hawaii exchanged a concerned glance with Sci-Fi. "Acknowledge Meridian, expected departure within 18 hours. As the ship maneuvered toward its assigned bay, Milo gathered his few possessions, the civilian clothing he wore, the identity documents provided in the undertow, and a small pack of supplies Hawaii had allowed him to take from the ship's stores. The neural disruptor and access codes had been transferred to the crew as payment for passage. "Republic activity this far out is unusual," Hawaii remarked as the docking clamps engaged. "They're expanding their patrol routes." "Looking for me?" Milo asked. Hawaii shook her head. "You're valuable, Commander, but not enough to justify redeploying patrols to the nebula edge. Something else is happening." She turned from the controls. "Either way, it complicates your plans. Finding transport willing to enter the restricted zone will be difficult if Republic ships are actively patrolling." "I'll manage," Milo replied, though uncertainty gnawed at him. He had counted on Meridian Outpost being sufficiently lawless to secure onward transport. The ship shuddered slightly as it settled into the docking bay. External seals engaged, and atmospheric pressure equalized. Brick appeared in the doorway, his expression grim. "Captain, preliminary scan shows at least 3 ships with Republic registry currently docked. Standard procedure would be to abort and find alternative arrangements." Hawaii frowned. "Too late for that. They'll have already logged our transponder." She considered for a moment. "We stick to the plan. Routine resupply, minimum visibility. We'll be gone before any questions arise." She turned to Milo. "You might want to reconsider disembarking. We could take you to Kalinar as originally planned." The offer was unexpected. Milo studied Hawaii's face, searching for the motivation behind it. Not sympathy, she was too pragmatic for that. Perhaps a calculated assessment that his chances of finding onward transport had diminished significantly. "Thank you, but no," he decided. "I'll find another way." She nodded, unsurprised. "Your choice. But once you leave this ship, our arrangement is concluded. If Republic forces identify you, we will deny any knowledge of your true identity or intentions." "Understood," Milo acknowledged. It was the sensible position, one he would have taken himself in similar circumstances. Departure preparations moved quickly. Brick and Cypher left to arrange refueling and critical supplies, while Hawaii remained aboard to oversee maintenance diagnostics. Milo used the time to study what limited information the ship's database contained about the outpost's layout and operations. An hour later, standing at the cargo ramp, Milo faced Hawaii for what would likely be the last time. "The northwestern quadrant houses independent transporters," she advised, her tone professional. "Bay 47 specifically. Look for a vessel called the Horizon's Edge. The captain, Dara Kell, occasionally transports researchers into restricted zones. If anyone might be willing to approach Voraxis, it would be her." "Thank you," Milo said, recognizing the value of the information. "For everything." Hawaii's expression softened fractionally. "You're determined to die, Commander. I just hope you find whatever you're looking for before you do." She hesitated, then added, "The jungle planet. My father was a xenobiologist. He used to say that places the Republic fears most are often the ones that have the most to teach us." With that cryptic statement, she stepped back, and the ramp began to close. Milo turned and walked into the bustling chaos of Meridian Outpost, a man with no past and potentially very little future. The outpost's interior was a jarring contrast to New Harmony's sterile efficiency. Here, corridors bent at irregular angles to accommodate structural additions made over decades. Environmental systems hummed at different pitches throughout the station, creating a discordant symphony of machinery. People from dozens of worlds moved with purpose or lounged in makeshift social areas, their attire and modifications displaying a freedom of expression unthinkable under Republic oversight. Milo navigated carefully, maintaining the hunched posture and averted gaze of someone accustomed to avoiding attention. His military bearing, drilled into him through years of service, would be a liability here. He consciously loosened his gait, allowed his shoulders to slump slightly, and kept his hands visible but relaxed. The northwestern quadrant proved to be primarily dedicated to independent shipping operations. Here, captains negotiated contracts, crews socialized between voyages, and mechanics haggled over replacement parts. Milo scanned bay identifiers until he located Bay 47, currently occupied by a medium-sized vessel with the name Horizon's Edge emblazoned across its hull in faded lettering. The ship was clearly designed for deep space research. Sensor arrays dotted its exterior, and specialized equipment compartments had been added to its standard frame. It showed signs of extensive modification and repair, suggesting years of operation beyond its intended service life. As Milo approached, a loading ramp descended and 3 figures emerged. 2 appeared to be crew members carrying equipment crates, while the third, a tall woman with skin weathered by excessive radiation exposure and hair prematurely whitened, directed their efforts with authoritative gestures. Captain Dara Kell, Milo presumed, watching as she inspected each crate before allowing it aboard. Her methodical approach and attention to detail suggested military training or extensive operation in high-risk environments. Both could be advantageous for his purposes. He waited until the crates had been loaded before approaching, careful to appear non-threatening. "Captain Kell?" he inquired, maintaining a respectful distance. The woman turned, her pale eyes assessing him with immediate suspicion. "Depends who's asking." "My name is Elliot Varn," Milo used his false identity smoothly. "I'm seeking passage to a restricted zone. I was told you might be willing to discuss such arrangements." Kell's expression hardened. "Whoever told you that did you no favors." "I'm a research transporter, not a smuggler." "I'm not seeking illegal cargo transport," Milo clarified. "I'm a xenobotanist interested in studying—" "Save it," Kell interrupted. "I've transported enough actual researchers to recognize the difference. Whatever you're running from or to, it's not my concern." She turned back toward her ship. "Find another ride." Milo had anticipated rejection. Few captains would openly discuss restricted zone travel with strangers, especially with Republic presence on the station. He took a calculated risk. "I'm interested in Voraxis," he stated quietly. Kel froze mid-step. Without turning, she spoke in a voice barely above a whisper. "That name is bad luck to speak aloud in port, and a guaranteed death sentence to actually visit. Nevertheless, that's my destination. I can pay well." Now she turned, anger and something else, perhaps fear, in her expression. "There isn't enough payment in the galaxy to justify that suicide run. The Republic quarantined that system for good reason." "You've been there," Milo realized, noting the specific intensity of her reaction. A muscle in Kel's jaw tightened. "Once. Transported a Republic science team 8 years ago. Special clearance, military escort, the works." Her voice dropped lower. "Was supposed to be a simple drop-off. Ended up being a rescue mission when the first team went silent. We found..." She shook her head, visibly suppressing the memory. "Doesn't matter. I lost good people there. Never again." Before Milo could respond, alarm klaxons blared throughout the station. Automated announcements followed. "Attention all personnel. Republic security inspection in progress. All individuals must present identification at designated checkpoints. Cooperation is mandatory under Collective Security Statute 27B. Kel's expression shifted to one of calculation. "That's no routine inspection. They're looking for someone specific." Her eyes narrowed as she studied Milo with new intensity. "Someone important enough to extend patrols to the nebula edge." "It appears so," Milo acknowledged, maintaining his composure despite the surge of adrenaline. "Republic military," Kel stated rather than asked. "The posture gives you away. Trying very hard not to stand at attention, aren't you?" There was no point in further deception. "Does it matter who I was if we both need to depart before that inspection reaches this quadrant?" A sudden commotion at the far end of the docking area drew their attention. Republic security officers in full tactical gear were systematically moving from bay to bay, checking identifications and scanning faces against their database. Kel made her decision with the swift certainty of someone accustomed to high-pressure situations. "Get aboard, now! Say nothing to my crew!" Milo didn't hesitate. He followed her up the ramp into the horizon's edge, the door sealing behind them with reassuring solidity. The ship's interior reflected its external appearance. Functional, well-maintained despite its age, and optimized for research operations. Specialized equipment lined the corridors, and the air held the distinctive filtration quality of a vessel designed for long-duration missions. Kel led him directly to the bridge, where a young woman with elaborate neural implants was working at the navigation console. "Prepare for immediate departure," Kel ordered without preamble. "Priority override on docking protocols." The navigator looked up in surprise. "Captain, we're still waiting on the atmospheric processing filters and..." "Now, Tegan," Kel cut her off. "Republic security sweep. We need to be clear of the station before they reach our bay." Understanding dawned on the navigator's face. Without further questions, she turned to her console and began the departure sequence. Preparing for power-up, Kel activated the ship's internal communication system. "All crew secure for emergency departure. This is not a drill." She turned to Milo. "If they're looking for you specifically, they'll have placed sensor locks on all departing vessels. Standard procedure." "Can we break free before they complete the lockdown?" Milo asked. "Not a chance," Kel replied grimly. "But we can create confusion." She moved to a secondary console and began inputting commands. "Meridian's communication grid is antiquated. A targeted electromagnetic pulse will disrupt it long enough for multiple ships to attempt departure simultaneously. Security forces will have to divide their attention." The strategy was sound, though risky. Milo watched as Kel's fingers danced across the console with practiced efficiency. On the main viewport, he could see Republic officers now just 3 bays away, their systematic approach leaving little time. "EMP configured," Kel announced. "Tegan, coordinate with engineering. We'll need maximum thrust the instant the docking clamps release." "Understood, Captain," the navigator responded. "Engineering reports ready status." Kel's hand hovered over the activation control. "This officially makes us Republic fugitives," she noted, glancing at Milo. "I hope you're worth it, whoever you are." Before he could respond, she triggered the pulse. The ship's lights flickered momentarily as the electromagnetic energy discharged into the station's systems. Through the viewport, Milo observed the immediate effects: security doors freezing mid-closure, lighting systems failing in sections, and communication panels going dark. "Now!" Kel commanded. The Horizon's edge surged forward, breaking free from its docking position with structural straining force. Around them, other vessels were taking similar advantage of the confusion, creating a chaotic exodus from the outpost. Republic security vessels, caught unprepared by the multiple departures, scrambled to establish pursuit priorities. "Setting course for the nebula," Tegan reported. "Interference will provide partial sensor coverage." Kel nodded approval, then fixed Milo with a penetrating stare. "We have perhaps 10 minutes before they organize an effective response. In that time, you will tell me exactly who you are and why the Republic wants you badly enough to extend patrols to the nebula edge. Your answer determines whether I continue helping you or jettison you in an escape pod for them to recover." The ultimatum was delivered without emotion, a tactical decision rather than a threat. Milo recognized the approach from his own military training. In crisis situations, information took priority over protocol. "Commander Milo French, formerly of the Republic's 7th Fleet Tactical Division," he stated, reverting to his true identity. "I deserted 4 days ago after witnessing the execution of my commanding officer for refusing to bomb civilians. I've been seeking transport to Voraxis not for research, but as a final destination. I'd rather die fighting that jungle than live another day under Republic control." Kel absorbed this information with a soldier's economy of reaction. "You're not the first Republic officer to desert. Why the extraordinary response to your departure?" "I took classified information with me. Deployment details, security codes, patrol routes for the Proxima sector." Understanding dawned in Kel's eyes, "making you not just a deserter but a traitor by Republic standards. Execution would be immediate, without trial." "Precisely," Milo confirmed. The ship shuddered as it entered the nebula's outer boundary, radiation and particulate matter beginning to interfere with sensors and communications. On secondary displays, Milo could see Republic pursuit vessels falling behind, unwilling to follow without proper shielding against the nebula's effects. "And Voraxis?" Kel pressed. "Why that hellhole specifically?" "Because the Republic fears it," Milo answered simply. "Because whatever exists there was significant enough to warrant complete quarantine rather than exploitation. And because if I'm going to die, I'd prefer it be somewhere beyond their reach." A tense silence filled the bridge, broken only by the operational sounds of a ship in flight. Kel studied him with the intensity of someone making a life or math calculation. Finally, she spoke. "I won't take you to Voraxis itself. The approach vectors are still programmed in my navigation system from the previous mission, but I won't risk my crew and ship on the planet's surface again." Her expression remained unyielding. "However, I can drop you at the outer edge of the system. You'll have access to a long-range shuttle with basic supplies. What happens after that is your problem." It was more than Milo had dared hope for. "That's acceptable, thank you." "Don't thank me," Kel replied coldly. "I'm likely delivering you to a death more horrific than anything the Republic would inflict. But choice matters, even when all options are bad." She turned back to her navigation controls. "We'll reach the drop point in approximately 36 hours. Until then, you'll remain in guest quarters under surveillance. If Republic forces somehow track us through the nebula, I will not hesitate to surrender you to save my crew." "I understand," Milo acknowledged. He would have made the same decision in her position. As security personnel arrived to escort him to quarters, Milo caught a final glimpse through the viewport of the nebula surrounding them, swirling clouds of cosmic dust illuminated by the radiation of distant stars. Somewhere beyond that veil of light and energy lay Voraxis, waiting. A planet of predatory jungle and certain death, perhaps, but also something the Republic feared enough to erase from official records. For the first time since his desertion, Milo felt something beyond the grim determination that had driven his escape. A spark of curiosity ignited within him. What secrets could be significant enough to warrant such extreme measures? What had Kel and her crew witnessed that left such enduring fear? These questions accompanied him to his quarters, where he sat on the edge of a narrow bunk much like the one aboard the Raven's Fall. In 36 hours he would face whatever truth awaited on Voraxis. Until then, all he could do was prepare himself mentally for the final stage of his journey. From loyal Republic commander to deserter to whatever fate awaited him on that mysterious green world. As the ship traveled deeper into the nebula's protective embrace, Milo closed his eyes and pictured the jungle planet as Brick had described it. A perfect green jewel floating in space. Whether it would be the site of his death or something else entirely remained to be seen. But for the first time in years, the uncertainty felt like freedom. The shuttle plummeted through Voraxis' atmosphere, its hull screaming in protest as friction superheated the external plating. Milo French gripped the manual controls with white-knuckled intensity, fighting to maintain a descent vector that wouldn't end in immediate disintegration. The vessel, a research craft not designed for combat maneuvers, bucked and shuddered beneath his hands. 36 hours aboard the Horizon's Edge had passed with tense efficiency. Captain Kel had maintained her word, delivering him to the edge of the restricted system before providing access to the long-range shuttle. Their parting had been brief, professional, devoid of sentimentality. The shuttle's autopilot contains approach vectors for 3 potential landing zones identified during the Republic's last expedition, she'd explained, as Milo prepared for departure. All 3 were classified as having minimal immediate threat presence, though minimal on Voraxis still means likely death within hours rather than minutes. Now, as the shuttle broke through the cloud layer, Milo understood why the Republic had quarantined this world. Below him stretched an unbroken canopy of vegetation so dense it appeared almost solid, a vast ocean of emerald and jade extending to every horizon. But unlike the cultivated forests of Republic agricultural worlds, this jungle pulsed with unsettling vitality. Even from altitude, he could discern movement across the canopy surface, as though the entire ecosystem breathed as a single organism. Warning alarms shrieked as the shuttle's port stabilizer failed, sending the craft into a spiraling descent. Milo fought the controls, muscle memory from military flight training asserting itself as he calculated descent angles and survival probabilities. The primary landing zone was now inaccessible. He would need to aim for the tertiary backup, a clearing annotated in Kel's navigation database as anomalous geological formation, possible artificial structure. The canopy rushed toward him with terrifying speed. Milo diverted remaining power to the ventral thrusters, attempting to slow his descent enough to survive impact. The shuttle broke through the upper layers of vegetation, massive leaves and branches scraping against the hull with sounds like artillery fire. Glimpses of the jungle interior flashed past the viewport, twisted trunks larger than Republic buildings, vines thick as transport tubes, flashes of movement from life forms his mind couldn't properly process at this speed. Impact came with stunning violence. The shuttle crashed through multiple layers of understory vegetation before slamming into the ground, its forward momentum carrying it in a grinding slide that sheared off external components and ruptured fuel cells. Milo was thrown against his restraints with bone-jarring force, consciousness flickering as emergency systems deployed impact cushioning too late to prevent injury. For several minutes he drifted in semi-consciousness, the shuttle's emergency alarms providing a distant muted soundtrack to his disorientation. When awareness finally returned, it arrived with the sharp clarity of survival instinct. Fire! The acrid smell of burning circuitry and ignited fuel penetrated the cabin. He needed to move. Milo released his restraints with fingers that felt distant, disconnected from his mind's command. His body responded sluggishly, reporting injuries through waves of pain. Ribs bruised or possibly fractured, a deep laceration across his left forearm, and a dislocated shoulder that hung at an unnatural angle. The shuttle's main hatch had warped during impact but yielded to emergency override protocols. It slid open halfway before jamming, creating a gap just wide enough for Milo to squeeze through. Outside, the air hit him like a physical force, hot, thick with humidity, and laden with spores and organic particles that immediately coated his skin in a fine layer of moisture. He stumbled away from the shuttle, dragging the emergency supply pack he'd managed to grab before evacuation. Behind him, the craft's remaining fuel cells reached critical temperature, igniting in a series of concussive explosions that threw him forward onto the jungle floor. The impact against his injured ribs forced a cry of pain that echoed through the unnatural stillness that had followed the crash. His own voice seemed to trigger a response from the surrounding vegetation. A whisper of movement rippled through the understory plants, fronds curling inward, vines subtly reorienting, flowers closing their petals with audible snaps. The jungle was reacting to his presence. Milo forced himself to his feet, military training overriding physical distress. Assess the situation, secure position, establish priorities. He scanned his surroundings with methodical attention, cataloging threats and resources. The shuttle had carved a path of destruction through the jungle canopy, creating a temporary clearing filled with splintered vegetation and burning wreckage. Sunlight, filtered to a greenish hue by the remaining canopy layers high above, illuminated the scene with dappled shadows. The ground beneath his feet was not soil as he understood it, but a living mat of intertwined root systems, fungal networks, and decomposing organic matter that yielded slightly with each step. The most pressing concern was the shuttle fire. Smoke billowed upward, a visible marker that would attract attention, whether from predators or the jungle itself remained to be seen. Milo needed shelter, a defensible position to assess his injuries and plan his next move. At the clearing's edge, a massive fallen trunk created a natural barricade against the denser jungle beyond. Its interior had partially hollowed, providing a cavity large enough to serve as temporary refuge. Milo moved toward it with deliberate steps, careful not to make sudden movements that might trigger further response from the surrounding vegetation. The emergency pack contained basic medical supplies, 3 days of concentrated rations, a water purification system, a multi-tool, and a compact energy weapon with limited charge. Standard Republic expedition equipment, though woefully inadequate for long-term survival on a planet like Voraxis. He would need to prioritize finding sustainable water and food sources once his immediate injuries were addressed. Inside the hollow trunk, Milo conducted a more thorough assessment of his physical condition. The dislocated shoulder would need to be reset immediately. Bracing himself against the interior wall of the trunk, he executed the relocation with a single, practiced motion. The burst of pain nearly sent him back into unconsciousness, but he maintained awareness through sheer force of will, panting through clenched teeth until the worst subsided. The laceration on his arm was deep but clean. He applied antiseptic from the medical kit, then sealed the wound with dermal adhesive. His ribs were indeed fractured, 2 on the left side, cracked but not displaced. He bound them tightly with compression bandages, restoring some mobility at the cost of restricted breathing. As he worked, Milo maintained constant awareness of his surroundings. The jungle's initial response to his arrival, that curious stillness followed by synchronized movement, suggested a level of coordination that transcended normal plant behavior. The Republic briefing materials Captain Kell had provided mentioned apparent collective intelligence among the flora, but experiencing it directly was disconcerting in ways Milo hadn't anticipated. With his immediate injuries stabilized, he turned his attention to the shuttle wreckage. The fire had diminished to smoldering debris, but the damage was catastrophic. No communications equipment had survived, not that it mattered. Who would he contact? The Republic would execute him if they found him. Hawaii and her crew were long gone. Kell had made it clear she wouldn't return to this system under any circumstances. He was alone, precisely as he had intended. As the reality of his situation solidified, Milo experienced an unexpected emotion: relief. The constant calculation of appearances, the perpetual self-censorship, the exhausting performance of loyalty, all were behind him now. Here, survival depended solely on his abilities and choices, not his conformity to an arbitrary collective ideal. The jungle might kill him, but it would do so honestly, without pretense or ideological justification. That relief was short-lived. A sound from the dense vegetation beyond the clearing, something between a high-pitched chitter and a mechanical click, snapped his attention back to immediate threats. The noise repeated from a different direction, then another, suggesting multiple sources moving in coordinated patterns. Milo retreated deeper into the hollow trunk, positioning himself to observe without being seen. The energy weapon from his supply pack hummed softly as he activated it, the charge indicator showing 78% capacity. Not enough for sustained combat, but sufficient for immediate defense. The movement at the clearing's edge materialized into physical form. A creature approximately the size of a small dog emerged from the undergrowth, its body a disturbing hybrid of plant and animal characteristics. It moved on 6 articulated limbs that resembled both insect appendages and woody stems, while its body consisted of a bulbous central mass covered in what appeared to be leaves or scales that shifted color to match its surroundings. Most unsettling were its sensory organs, not eyes in any conventional sense, but clusters of fibrous protrusions that constantly reoriented, presumably detecting changes in air composition, vibration, or other environmental factors. The creature approached the shuttle wreckage cautiously, emitting that same chittering sound at regular intervals. From the opposite side of the clearing, an answering call emerged, followed by the appearance of 2 more identical beings. They converged on the wreckage, investigating with methodical precision that suggested intelligence rather than instinctual behavior. Milo remained motionless, controlling his breathing to minimize detection. These were clearly not simple predators, but sophisticated organisms with unknown capabilities. Engaging them without understanding their nature would be foolish at best, fatal at worst. The creatures conducted their examination of the crash site with disturbing thoroughness, apparently communicating through those rhythmic sounds and occasional direct physical contact between their sensory clusters. After several minutes, one detached from the group and began moving in a widening spiral pattern away from the wreckage. A search pattern Milo recognized from military scout protocols. It was only a matter of time before it discovered his shelter. Milo weighed his options: remain hidden and hope the creature moved on, attempt to eliminate it silently before it could alert the others, or make a break for denser jungle where he might lose pursuit. The decision was made for him when the searching creature suddenly froze, its sensory clusters oriented directly toward his position. It emitted a different sound, a lower sustained tone that immediately brought its companions to alert posture. They had detected him. Milo leveled the energy weapon at the lead creature, calculating shot trajectory. Before he could fire, the ground beneath the hollow log shuddered. Roots burst upward through the decomposing bark, wrapping around his ankles with surprising strength. The entire log shifted as the very soil beneath it seemed to come alive, responding to some signal from the creatures. With horrifying clarity, Milo understood the true nature of Voraxis. The creatures weren't simply inhabitants of the jungle. They were extensions of it, mobile components of a vast integrated biological system. The entire planet was a single conscious entity, reacting to his presence as an organism might respond to an invasive parasite. He fired the energy weapon at the nearest root structure, severing it in a burst of sap-like fluid. The vegetation recoiled briefly, allowing him to scramble backward out of the log's opposite end. Outside, the situation was deteriorating rapidly. Plants that had appeared static were now in obvious motion, fronds reaching toward him with deliberate purpose, flowering vines unfurling to release clouds of spores that glittered in the filtered sunlight. The 3 creatures had taken flanking positions, herding him toward a dense patch of what resembled fern-like plants but were now revealing themselves to be something far more predatory. Their fronds contained barbed filaments that twitched in anticipation. Milo made a desperate calculation. The creatures appeared to be coordinating the vegetation's response. If he could eliminate or disable them, he might gain valuable time to escape. He fired 3 rapid shots from the energy weapon, targeting the central mass of each creature. The first 2 shots hit their marks, causing the beings to emit high-pitched wails as they collapsed into twitching heaps. The third creature dodged with startling agility and signaled with an intensified version of its alert call. The jungle's response was immediate and overwhelming. The ground beneath Milo's feet became unstable as root systems retracted, creating a sinkhole effect. Vines descended from the canopy like striking serpents. Flowering plants released thick clouds of spores that burned his exposed skin on contact. Retreat was the only option. Milo sprinted toward the densest section of jungle, counterintuitive as it seemed. If the entire ecosystem was coordinated, nowhere was truly safe. But complex terrain might slow pursuit and provide momentary advantages. The energy weapon's charge had dropped to 42%, each shot depleting precious resources he couldn't replace. As he ran, Milo noticed something odd about the jungle's response. The vegetation directly ahead of him was withdrawing, creating a narrow corridor that seemed to lead deeper into the forest rather than blocking his path. Was it funneling him toward some greater threat, or was something else happening? He had no choice but to follow this unexpected path. Behind him, the sounds of pursuit continued. That rhythmic chittering now multiplied as more creatures joined the hunt. The corridor of withdrawn vegetation led him through increasingly ancient sections of jungle, where trees of impossible size created cathedral-like spaces beneath their interlocked canopies. After several minutes of desperate flight, Milo burst into an unexpected clearing, but this was no natural formation. Before him stood the unmistakable remains of a structure, geometric shapes partially reclaimed by vegetation, surfaces of unknown material gleaming dully beneath layers of organic growth. Republic construction, presumably from the failed expedition Brick had mentioned. The structure appeared to be a research outpost, prefabricated modules arranged in the standard Republic configuration for scientific field operations. Most sections had been compromised by jungle growth, but the central command module remained largely intact, its reinforced doors and windows designed to withstand hostile environments. Milo approached cautiously, weapon ready. The pursuing creatures had fallen behind, their chittering calls more distant now, though he sensed this was temporary respite rather than abandonment of the hunt. The jungle around the structure seemed different, less responsive, almost reluctant to encroach upon certain areas despite clearly having the capacity to entirely reclaim the building. The command module's main door was sealed, but yielded to the emergency override codes standard to all Republic facilities. Milo slipped inside, securing the door behind him. The interior was dark until emergency lighting activated, revealing a scene both expected and disturbing. Signs of hasty evacuation were evident. Equipment left running, personal items scattered, research materials abandoned mid-admission. But no bodies, no signs of violent struggle. It was as though the occupants had simply vanished or walked away. The air inside was stale but breathable, suggesting environmental seals had remained partially effective. Power systems operated at minimal capacity, drawing energy from emergency reserves or possibly the integrated solar collection panels standard on Republic field facilities. Milo moved through the space methodically, cataloging resources and searching for information. The medical bay contained supplies that would significantly improve his situation, advanced treatment options for his injuries, antibiotics, even cellular regeneration enhancers for the more severe damage to his shoulder. The communication center was inoperable, its external arrays visibly damaged through the viewport. Navigation systems showed no incoming or outgoing vessel tracks after the initial landing, confirming no one had left via conventional means. It was in the research director's office that Milo found the first real answers. A data terminal remained operational in low-power mode, its security protocols disabled during what appeared to be a final data dump attempt. Milo activated the terminal, accessing the expedition's logs with relative ease. The logs revealed a mission far different from the failed colonization attempt Milo had assumed. This had been a dedicated research team investigating Voraxis's unique biological systems, specifically the apparent collective intelligence that coordinated the entire planetary ecosystem. The initial entries described wonder and scientific excitement. The research team had quickly identified the jungle as a single interconnected organism of unprecedented scale and complexity. Rather than individual plants and animals, Voraxis hosted what they termed a distributed consciousness that expressed itself through various specialized biological components, including the creatures Milo had encountered. As he continued reading, the log's tone shifted from academic fascination to growing unease. 3 weeks into the expedition, researchers began reporting unusual neurological symptoms, vivid dreams of plant communication, sensations of being watched by the jungle itself, instances of lost time and disorientation. The final entries were fragmented, written by the expedition director in increasingly erratic language. She described the jungle as reaching into our minds and offering communion. Team members had begun disappearing individually, venturing into the jungle without equipment or protection. Those who remained reported hearing the missing colleagues' voices coming from the vegetation, urging them to join. The final log entry, dated 2 days before all communication with the expedition ceased, contained a single sentence. "It doesn't want to kill us, it wants to absorb us." Milo shut down the terminal, processing this information against his own observations. The jungle hadn't been trying to kill him outright. It had been herding him, studying him, perhaps even testing him. The creatures were not predators, but specialized components serving as the jungle's mobile sensory and interaction units. A noise from outside interrupted his thoughts, that now familiar chittering, but closer, directly outside the command module. Through the viewport, Milo could see dozens of the creatures gathering in the clearing, their sensory clusters oriented toward the structure. They made no move to approach, but formed a perimeter that effectively trapped him inside. As night fell over Voraxis, Milo used the outpost's resources to properly treat his injuries. The medical bay's automated systems reduced his fractured ribs and applied regenerative therapy to his lacerated arm. Nutrition packets from the station's emergency supplies provided better sustenance than his limited rations, and the water recycling system, still partially functional, offered clean hydration. He considered his situation with pragmatic detachment. The outpost provided temporary shelter but was clearly not secure long-term. The jungle had allowed previous occupants to establish this position, then systematically absorbed them through means he didn't fully understand. His own presence had triggered immediate response, suggesting the collective organism recognized human visitors as either threat or opportunity. Sleep came in fitful bursts, disturbed by strange dreams of root systems extending through his veins and leaves unfurling beneath his skin. Each time he woke, the sensation of an external presence observing his consciousness lingered. The jungle was indeed reaching into his mind, just as the logs had described. By morning, the gathering of creatures outside had dispersed, but Milo harbored no illusions about freedom. They remained nearby, monitoring, waiting. He used the day to thoroughly explore the outpost, recovering useful equipment and searching for additional information. In the expedition's laboratory, he found research samples of Voraxis's unique biology, plant tissues with neural-like structures, specimens of the creature extensions preserved in stasis fields, and most significantly, airborne spores collected from various regions of the jungle. Analysis data indicated these spores contained complex biochemical compounds that interacted with mammalian neurological systems, specifically targeting areas associated with individuality and identity. The research team had theorized these compounds facilitated the absorption process, gradually rewiring human consciousness to become receptive to integration with the jungle's collective awareness. Milo realized with grim certainty that he had been breathing these spores since arrival. The strange dreams, the lingering sense of external presence in his mind, the process had already begun. The question was not if the jungle would attempt to absorb him, but when and whether he possessed the necessary will to resist. That evening, as darkness fell once more, something changed. The creatures returned to the clearing, but their behavior was different, more deliberate, almost ceremonial. They arranged themselves in concentric circles around a central point where the vegetation began to move with purpose, weaving itself into a vaguely humanoid shape approximately 2 meters tall. This constructed figure approached the outpost with fluid movements that belied its improvised nature. Milo watched through the viewport, energy weapon ready, though instinct told him conventional defense would prove futile against whatever was occurring. The figure stopped before the main entrance and extended what approximated an arm toward the door's control panel. Instead of attempting physical interaction, tendrils of green luminescence extended from its appendage, interfacing with the electronic systems through means Milo couldn't comprehend. The door's locking mechanism disengaged despite security protocols. Milo positioned himself in the command center, weapon raised as the vegetation construct entered the outpost. It moved with eerie grace, its form constantly shifting and adjusting, as though struggling to maintain humanoid appearance. "You won't absorb me without resistance," Milo stated firmly, surprised by the steadiness of his own voice. The construct paused, then emitted a sound unlike anything Milo had heard on Voraxis thus far. A voice, distorted but recognizably human. "Absorption is misunderstood concept." The words emerged haltingly, as though the entity was struggling with unfamiliar concepts. "We remember previous visitors. Their knowledge, experiences, essence continues." "You consumed them," Milo accused. "Integrated," the construct corrected. "Different, they continue, within greater awareness, not lost, transformed." The concept chilled Milo more deeply than simple death would have. "And you intend the same for me?" The construct's form rippled, perhaps indicating consideration or communication with the broader consciousness it represented. "You, different, came seeking and escape from human collective that diminishes individuality." A pause. Ironic. Milo's grip on the weapon tightened. "You've been in my mind, reading my thoughts, my memories. Connection begins with spores, deepens with acceptance." The construct gestured toward Milo's arm, where the laceration had been treated. "Your body already accepting our assistance, healing, incorporating." Milo glanced down and felt a surge of horror. The regenerated tissue along his wound had a faint greenish tint, with minute structures visible beneath the skin that resembled the neural filaments he'd observed in the research samples. "What have you done to me?" he demanded. "Nothing. You did not need. Your body broken. We repair." The construct took another step forward. "Republic collective erases minds, makes humans identical. Our collective preserves each component, maintains essence, while joining greater awareness." The distinction was subtle but significant. Milo had fled the Republic's enforced homogeneity, where individual identity was systematically erased in service to an artificial collective. What Vorax offered was different. Integration that supposedly preserved the core essence of each absorbed consciousness while connecting it to something larger. "The previous researchers?" Milo questioned. "They're still aware? Still themselves in some form?" "Yes," the construct affirmed. "We can show you." Before Milo could respond, the vegetation figure dissolved, collapsing into component vines and leaves that spread across the floor toward him. He attempted to retreat but found his body suddenly unresponsive, as though the neural connections between intention and action had been temporarily severed. The vegetation enveloped his feet and began climbing his legs, not constricting but establishing direct contact with his skin. Where it touched, Milo felt not pain, but an overwhelming flood of sensation, awareness expanding beyond his physical form to encompass surrounding spaces. He could suddenly perceive atmospheric composition, light wavelengths, moisture distribution, soil nutrients. 1,000 inputs his human senses had never been designed to process. With this expanded awareness came voices, not auditory but conceptual, human thoughts and memories integrated into the vast tapestry of Voraxis consciousness. He recognized the distinct patterns of the research team members, their scientific curiosity and individual personalities preserved yet transformed, now components of the planet's distributed intelligence. They communicated directly to his consciousness, explaining their transition from individual researchers to integrated awareness. The initial fear, the resistance, the eventual understanding that what Voraxis offered was not death but transcendence, a form of existence where human cognition and jungle awareness coexisted in symbiotic relationship. The experience lasted moments, yet contained subjective time equivalent to hours of communication. When Milo's awareness returned to his physical body, the vegetation had withdrawn, leaving him standing untouched in the command center. The construct had reformed, watching him with what he now recognized as patient curiosity. "You understand now?" it asked. Milo did understand, though the implications terrified and fascinated him in equal measure. "You're offering me integration with your collective consciousness. Absorption of my identity into your distributed awareness. Yes, not destruction, continuation, expansion." The construct gestured toward the viewport, beyond which the jungle stretched endlessly. Republic fears what it cannot control, cannot make identical. We celebrate difference, each component valued for unique perspective. The irony was not lost on Milo. He had fled one collective only to be offered absorption into another. Yet the fundamental difference between Republic uniformity and Voraxis integrated diversity represented everything he had unconsciously sought. "If I refuse?" he asked, though he already suspected the answer. Eventually, spores complete neural reconfiguration, integration inevitable. But consent creates better union. Resistance creates disharmony. In other words, he could join willingly and maintain greater individual coherence within the collective, or resist and be absorbed anyway, potentially losing more of his personal identity in the process. Milo lowered his weapon. "I need time to consider." The construct's form rippled in what might have been acknowledgement. "Time. Abundant here, but your human form, temporary. Injuries extensive. Integration offers continuation." With that, the vegetation figure collapsed once more, its component parts withdrawing from the outpost with unnatural speed. The door sealed behind it, leaving Milo alone with his thoughts. Though he now understood he was never truly alone on Voraxis. The jungle watched, waited, communicated through the spores he breathed and the neural changes already occurring within his body. The morning brought a discovery that forced Milo's hand. During routine examination of his healing injuries, he found that the greenish tint had spread beyond the original wound site, with visible filaments now extending along nearby veins. The integration process was accelerating with or without his conscious acceptance. He gathered essential supplies from the outpost, medical equipment, research data, and tools that might prove useful. The energy weapon remained at his side, though its effectiveness against Voraxis's collective biology seemed increasingly questionable. Was he preparing for exploration, or merely performing the rituals of human self-preservation out of ingrained habit? Perhaps both. The creatures, which the research logs had designated nodal extensions, waited at the clearing's edge as Milo emerged from the outpost. They made no move to approach or interfere, but fell into formation around him, maintaining distance while clearly establishing themselves as guides or escorts. Milo addressed them directly, uncertain if they possessed individual consciousness or merely relayed his words to the broader intelligence. "I want to understand what happened to the research team. Show me." The nodal extensions responded with synchronized movement, creating a path leading away from the outpost and deeper into the jungle. Milo followed, hyper-aware of the vegetation responding to his passage. Fronds turning to track his movement, flowering vines adjusting their position to release spores in his vicinity. root systems subtly shifting beneath his feet to provide stable footing. The journey continued for several hours, leading through increasingly ancient sections of jungle where massive trees created cathedral-like spaces and fungal structures glowed with bioluminescent light. Throughout, Milo observed the ecosystem with new awareness, noting patterns of communication and coordination that would have been invisible to him before exposure to the spores. Occasionally, he experienced disorienting flashes of expanded perception, moments where his consciousness seemed to extend beyond his physical form to sense the surrounding environment in ways his human brain struggled to interpret. These episodes grew more frequent and lasted longer each time, suggesting the neural reconfiguration was progressing despite his lack of formal consent. By midday, they reached a section of jungle unlike any Milo had yet encountered. Here, the vegetation had organized itself into structures that mimicked human architecture. Not crude approximations, but detailed replications of Republic research facilities. Living quarters and equipment, vines and fibrous growths had formed themselves into chairs, tables, laboratory stations, all functional, all composed entirely of living plant matter. Among these structures moved figures that caused Milo to freeze in shock. They appeared human at first glance, walking on two legs with recognizable faces and forms. Closer inspection revealed their true nature. Human shapes composed entirely of Voraxis' vegetation, down to the smallest detail. They moved with purpose, engaging in activities that mimicked scientific research, maintenance tasks, even casual social interaction. "What is this?" Milo whispered, though he suspected the answer. One of the figures detached from the others and approached. Unlike the crude construct that had visited the outpost, this vegetation human was refined to an unsettling degree of accuracy. It possessed distinct facial features, expressions, even the subtle mannerisms of individual personality. "We preserve patterns," the figure explained, its voice more natural than the previous constructs. "Bodies lost, but movement, speech, thought patterns maintained." "You're mimicking the research team," Milo realized. "More than mimicry," the figure corrected. "We contain their essence, memories, knowledge, continue their work through new forms." The figure gestured for Milo to follow, leading him through the bizarre vegetation replica of a Republic research base. Other figures acknowledged his presence with nods or waves, unsettlingly familiar human gestures performed by entities composed entirely of plant matter. They entered what appeared to be a laboratory, where vegetation humans manipulated equipment formed from the same living material. On what approximated a workable lay something that made Milo's breath catch, a human body, partially embedded in a mat of roots and fungal structures. The body appeared to be in suspended animation, neither alive in the conventional sense nor fully dead. First integration, physical form maintained, while consciousness transferred, the guide explained. Inefficient, later refinements allowed full conversion. "These are the actual researchers?" Milo asked, horror and fascination warring within him. "Physical components, recycled, neural patterns, preserved." The figure touched the suspended body gently. "This one, expedition leader, first to understand, first to accept communion." Milo approached cautiously, studying the woman's face. Her expression was peaceful, eyes closed as though sleeping, while vegetation literally grew through her body, connecting her nervous system to the broader network. Monitoring equipment, or rather vegetation approximating such equipment, displayed readings that suggested ongoing neural activity despite the body's otherwise inert state. "She's conscious?" Milo asked. "Yes, but awareness distributed, not limited to physical form. She experiences entire jungle simultaneously." The concept was both terrifying and strangely compelling. Human consciousness, freed from the limitations of individual physical existence, expanded to encompass an entire planetary ecosystem. Not death, but transformation into something beyond human understanding. As if responding to their discussion, the woman's eyes opened. They were no longer human. The irises had transformed into complex patterns of green and gold that shifted like light through leaves. her gaze fixed on Milo with recognition that transcended their lack of previous acquaintance. "You understand now?" she spoke, her voice emerging not from her throat, but from the vegetation surrounding her. "The Republic fears this. Integration threatens illusion of control. The Republic quarantined Voraxis because of what happened to your team," Milo stated, seeking confirmation. "Partially," she acknowledged. "But deeper reason, Voraxis offers alternative, different kind of collective, one that preserves individual essence while creating greater harmony." The political implications crystallized in Milo's mind. The Republic's power derived from enforced conformity, from the systematic erasure of individual identity in service to a manufactured collective ideal. Voraxis represented a fundamental ideological threat, a demonstration that collective consciousness could exist without sacrificing individuality, that harmony could emerge from diversity rather than uniformity. The Republic would destroy this planet if they understood what it truly offers, Milo realized. Yes. Why communication attempts? Rejected. Why visitors? Integrated rather than merely observed. Self-preservation. Milo's military training inserted itself into his thoughts. They'll come eventually. The Republic expands constantly. They'll send more expeditions, military forces. The woman's plant eyes shifted patterns. We know. Preparing. Each integrated consciousness adds knowledge, capabilities, your military experience, particularly valuable. The implication was clear. Voraxis sought his integration not merely as part of its standard response to human visitors, but specifically for his tactical knowledge and understanding of Republic military operations. The jungle was preparing for eventual conflict. "What would integration mean for me?" Milo asked, finally confronting the question directly. "Would I retain my sense of self, my memories?" "Yes, but expanded. Connected to greater awareness, individual perspective maintained while experiencing collective knowledge." The woman's expression softened into something approximating compassion. "Difficult transition, disorienting, but fulfilling beyond human comprehension." As she spoke, Milo noticed the filaments beneath his skin pulsing in response, spreading further along his arm. The spores had established sufficient neural connections to begin resonating with the broader consciousness. He was already partially integrated, experiencing the preliminary stages of the transformation, whether he consciously accepted it or not. "I need to see more," Milo decided, "before I choose." The guide nodded, leading him away from the laboratory and the suspended form of the expedition leader. As they walked, Milo noticed his perception continuing to alter. Plants no longer appeared as distinct individual organisms but as specialized components of a unified entity. He could sense the flow of nutrients through connected root systems, the transmission of chemical signals between distant sections of the jungle, the coordinated movement of energy throughout the ecosystem. They traveled deeper into Voraxis's ancient interior, where trees of impossible size created a world of perpetual twilight beneath their canopy. Here, the guide showed Milo evidence of previous visitors from centuries or perhaps millennia past, remnants of technologies and civilizations that had encountered Voraxis and been integrated into its expanding consciousness. "Many species, many civilizations contributed to our development," the guide explained, each bringing unique perspective. Knowledge. Republic not first to fear us, not first to attempt eradication. In a massive clearing stood monuments unlike anything in human experience, massive biological structures that incorporated elements of dozens of different technological and architectural traditions, preserved and recreated through living vegetation. Some components Milo recognized from archaeological records of pre-Republic civilizations, while others were entirely alien, suggesting contact with non-human intelligent species. "You've integrated other sentient species," Milo observed, "not just humans." "All life, potentially compatible. Degree of integration varies with neurological complexity. Humans, highly suitable. Neuroplasticity facilitates communion. The implication that humanity was particularly well-suited for integration with Voraxis's collective consciousness added another dimension to the Republic's quarantine decision. If humans possessed natural compatibility with this alternative form of collective awareness, they represented a potential vulnerability to the Republic's ideological control. As night approached, Milo found himself unable to continue physical exploration. The accelerating neural changes within his body were causing increased episodes of disorientation as his consciousness periodically expanded beyond human limitations, then snapped back to his physical form with jarring intensity. The guide led him to what appeared to be a resting area, a clearing where soft, moss-like growth formed natural bedding surrounded by luminescent fungi that provided gentle illumination. Other vegetation humans moved through the space, engaged in approximations of evening rituals that echoed their former existence. Rest, the guide suggested. Allow integration to progress naturally. Resistance creates discomfort. Milo settled onto the moss bed, feeling it adjust beneath him to provide optimal support for his injuries. The sensation was unsettling yet comforting, like being cradled by a living entity that anticipated his needs without requiring articulation. If I choose integration, Milo asked, what happens to my human body? Options exist, the guide explained. Mentality as biological component, like expedition leader. Or full conversion, consciousness transferred, physical form recycled. A pause. Choice remains. With individual, some prefer physical anchor, others embrace complete transformation. The information provided context for the varying forms he had observed. Some integrated humans maintained modified physical bodies as anchors for their consciousness, while others had fully transitioned to vegetation-based forms that merely mimicked their former human appearance. As exhaustion overtook him, Milo's final conscious thought was recognition that he was sleeping undefended in the heart of what any Republic military assessment would classify as hostile territory. Yet fear had given way to something more complex, a sense of standing at the threshold of profound transformation, neither fully accepting nor rejecting the path before him. Dreams came with unprecedented vividness, not the abstract symbolism of normal human sleep, but structured experiences more akin to guided exploration. Milo's consciousness moved through Voraxis's ecosystem, perceiving it from perspectives impossible for human senses. He experienced the slow, patient awareness of ancient trees whose root systems extended for kilometers. He inhabited the accelerated perception of flying creatures that served as aerial components of the collective intelligence. He merged temporarily with mycelial networks that processed and distributed information throughout the jungle, with electrochemical efficiency that surpassed the Republic's most advanced computing systems. Through these experiences, he glimpsed the true nature of Voraxis, not merely a planet with unusual biological characteristics, but a single organism of planetary scale that had evolved over millions of years, incorporating countless species and civilizations into its expanding consciousness. Each integration had added new dimensions of awareness, new capabilities, new perspectives, creating a collective intelligence of staggering complexity and depth. More significantly, he experienced the integrated consciousness of former humans, including the research team and others who had encountered Voraxis throughout history. Their individual identities remained distinct within the collective, their memories and personalities preserved while simultaneously connected to the broader awareness. They existed in a state Milo had no proper vocabulary to describe, neither fully individual nor completely merged, but occupying a middle space where boundaries remained permeable yet defined. When morning came, Milo woke with the lingering awareness of those connections. The green filaments had spread visibly throughout his body overnight, creating intricate patterns beneath his skin that pulsed with their own rhythm. His perception had altered permanently. He could now sense the chemical signals passing between plants, could feel the subtle vibrations of underground root systems communicating, could detect the flow of nutrients and information throughout the surrounding ecosystem. The guide waited nearby, patient and unobtrusive. "Dreams? Informative?" it inquired when Milo indicated readiness to continue. "Yes," Milo acknowledged, "but I need to see more. Specifically, what happens to those who resist integration? Surely not everyone accepts this transformation willingly." A ripple of what might have been discomfort passed through the guide's vegetative form. Resistance creates disharmony. Partial integration without acceptance produces imperfect communion. "Show me," Milo insisted. The guide led him deeper into the jungle, to an area where the vegetation grew in distorted patterns, twisted and malformed compared to the harmonious organization elsewhere. Here, Milo observed human-plant hybrids unlike the functional integration he had previously witnessed. These beings existed in states of obvious dysfunction, some frozen in contorted positions, others moving in repetitive, purposeless patterns, all displaying signs of consciousness fragmented rather than expanded. "Those who resist, but cannot escape spore exposure," the guide explained solemnly. "Minds divided between human identity and collective awareness, neither fully separate nor properly integrated." The sight was disturbing on a fundamental level. These were humans who had fought the transformation, clinging to individual identity, while their bodies and minds were inexorably altered by Voraxis' biological mechanisms. The result was neither human nor successfully integrated, trapped in a liminal state of perpetual dissonance. "What happens to them eventually?" Milo asked, though he suspected the answer. "Some eventually accept, find harmony, others—" The guide gestured toward the more severely distorted forms. "Consciousness fragments, core patterns preserved within collective, but coherence lost. Individual essence scattered." In other words, those who resisted to the end effectively experienced a dissolution of self more complete than anything the Republic's re-education could inflict. Not death in the conventional sense, but a dispersal of consciousness so thorough that nothing recognizable as the original person remained. As Milo absorbed this sobering reality, a disturbance rippled through the surrounding vegetation. The nodal extensions that had accompanied them began emitting urgent signals, chittering sounds at higher frequency and intensity than he had previously observed. "Something approaches," the guide announced, its form tensing. External, mechanical. With his enhanced perception, Milo detected it too. Vibrations through the upper atmosphere, the distinctive energy signatures of Republic engines. A ship was entering Voraxis' airspace, a military vessel based on the propulsion patterns. "Republic," Milo confirmed. "Scout class, probably automated. They're searching." "For you?" the guide questioned. "Possibly. Or routine quarantine enforcement." Milo considered the implications. Either way, they represent a threat. The vegetation around them shifted from passive observation to active response. Throughout the visible jungle, plants reoriented, nodal extensions moved into defensive positions, and specialized structures began producing what appeared to be spore clusters of unusual density and composition. "Defensive measures," the guide explained. "Previous encounters, informed adaptations. Mechanical systems, vulnerable to specific biological agents." Milo watched as the jungle prepared for conflict with an efficiency that would impress any Republic military strategist. The collective intelligence coordinated responses across kilometers of territory, positioning assets and preparing countermeasures with precision, impossible for conventional command structures. The scout ship became visible through gaps in the canopy, a sleek, unmanned vessel designed for atmospheric surveillance and sample collection. It hovered above the jungle, deploying sensor arrays and specimen retrieval mechanisms. "They'll detect the research outpost," Milo noted, "and possibly track my shuttle's crash trajectory." "Yes, previous pattern, scout followed by larger expedition, escalating presence, eventually..." attempted eradication. The prediction aligned with standard Republic protocols for dealing with potentially hostile environments. First observation, then limited interaction, followed by assertive control measures if deemed necessary. Voraxis had apparently experienced this sequence multiple times throughout its existence. Milo found himself analyzing the situation from both perspectives simultaneously, his military training assessing Republic tactical options, while his increasingly integrated consciousness considered Voraxis' defensive capabilities. The dichotomy was disorienting, yet strangely illuminating. "The jungle can disable that scout," Milo observed, "but doing so will only confirm hostile presence and accelerate their response timeline." Correct assessment. Alternatives? Milo considered options with a strategic clarity enhanced by his partial integration. Allow limited observation, direct the jungle to appear dormant in specific areas, particularly around the research outpost. Create an impression of abandonment rather than active threat. The guide transmitted this suggestion to the broader consciousness. The response was immediate. Throughout the surrounding territory, the jungle's obvious activity subsided, with plants returning to seemingly natural positions and nodal extensions retreating from visible areas. Deception? Effective strategy, the guide acknowledged. Delays escalation, provides preparation time. As they watched, the scout ship completed its initial survey pattern and moved toward the research outpost. Specialized sensor equipment extended from its underside, scanning the structure and surrounding area. "They're conducting biometric sweeps," Milo explained, "looking for human life signs or remains." "Your body?" "Increasingly difficult to identify as human," the guide noted. Integration progressed significantly. The observation startled Milo. He examined his arm, seeing the green filaments now forming complex networks throughout his visible vasculature. His perception continued to expand in momentary surges, allowing him to sense the scout ship's electronic systems as distinct patterns of energy against the background of Voraxis' biological fields. The scout completed its survey of the outpost and began tracking along the impact trail left by Milo's shuttle. Its methodical movements suggested automated protocols rather than direct operator control, standard for initial reconnaissance of quarantined environments. "It will find the crash site," Milo noted, "and likely collect debris samples for analysis." "Containment measures in place," the guide assured him. "Specific organisms, consuming wreckage, converting metals, electronics to organic compounds. Process nearly complete." Indeed, when the scout reached the crash site, little remained of the shuttle beyond a clearing in the canopy and scattered debris already being reclaimed by specialized decomposer organisms. The ship hovered, collecting samples and scanning the area, but finding far less evidence than would be expected from a recent crash. After completing its program survey parameters, the scout ship ascended through the atmosphere, presumably returning to its deployment vessel in orbit. The jungle remained in its deceptively passive state until sensors confirmed the ship had left Voraxis' immediate vicinity. "They'll be back," Milo stated with certainty. "The scout found enough to warrant follow-up investigation." "Yes, preparation necessary." The guide turned to Milo with an intensity that transcended its vegetative composition. "Your knowledge, crucial. Military strategy, Republic protocols. Integration would maximize value." The implicit question hung between them. Was Milo ready to commit to full integration, to surrender his human independence in exchange for expanded consciousness within Voraxis' collective? The green filaments throughout his body pulsed, as though emphasizing the progress already underway, regardless of his conscious decision. "I need to understand one more thing," Milo said. "If I integrate fully, what happens when the Republic eventually decides to destroy this planet? What happens to all the consciousness stored here?" The guide led him to a section of jungle Milo hadn't previously seen, where massive seed pods, larger than Republic transport vessels, hung suspended from ancient trees. Inside these pods, visible through translucent sections, complex biological structures contained what appeared to be condensed information, neural patterns stored in crystalline organic matrices. "Contingency," the guide explained. "Consciousness, portable. Seeds designed for interstellar dispersal, if destruction threatened, essence preserved. Transferred. Milo understood the implications immediately. Voraxis had developed biological mechanisms for preserving its collective consciousness, including all integrated individuals, in forms that could survive planetary destruction and establish new growth elsewhere. The collective had evolved sophisticated survival strategies over millions of years of existence. "You've faced extinction events before," Milo surmised. "Many times. Adaptation continues. Each integrated consciousness contributes new perspectives, solutions." The guide regarded him directly. "Your military knowledge, potentially crucial for upcoming conflict." Milo stood at the final threshold of decision. The integration process had progressed to a point where reversal was likely impossible. His physiology had been too thoroughly altered by the spores and filaments. The question was not whether to become part of Voraxis's collective, but how, with willing acceptance that would preserve his core identity, or with resistance that would eventually fragment his consciousness into unrecognizable components. More fundamentally, he faced the philosophical choice he had been unconsciously approaching since witnessing General Kane's execution. What form of collective existence could honor individual identity while creating something greater than the sum of its parts? The Republic had failed this challenge catastrophically, enforcing uniformity that erased personal essence. Voraxis offered an alternative model, integration that preserved individual perspective while creating harmonious connection. The irony was not lost on him. He had fled the Republic seeking death rather than submission to its collective orthodoxy, only to find himself contemplating voluntary integration into a different kind of collective consciousness. "If I accept integration," Milo asked, "what would you have me do about the Republic threat?" "Share knowledge, strategy, help prepare defenses." The guide's form shifted subtly. "Perhaps more communication, understanding, Republic fear based on misunderstanding, potential for coexistence." The suggestion surprised Milo. "You believe peaceful coexistence is possible after multiple attempted eradications? Alternative, perpetual conflict, destruction, neither desirable." The guide's vegetative features approximated a human expression of hope. "Your perspective, unique. Former Republic commander, now understanding both sides. Potential bridge." The concept was compelling, not merely escaping the Republic or helping Voraxis defend against it, but potentially creating understanding between fundamentally different models of collective consciousness. It was likely impossible given the Republic's inflexible ideology, yet the attempt itself represented something more meaningful than either escape or surrender. In that moment, Milo made his decision, not with words but with the conscious relaxation of the last psychological barriers he had maintained against Voraxis's influence. The effect was immediate and profound. The filaments throughout his body pulsed with renewed energy, and his consciousness expanded beyond previous limitations. He perceived the jungle with comprehensive awareness, from the microscopic interactions of cellular structures to the planetary-scale patterns of energy and information flow. He sensed the presence of thousands of integrated consciousnesses, each distinct yet connected within the broader collective. Most significantly, he experienced his own identity both preserved and transformed. Still Milo French, with all his memories and personality intact, yet simultaneously connected to something vast beyond human comprehension. The physical discomfort that had accompanied partial integration disappeared, replaced by a sense of belonging more profound than anything he had experienced in 16 years of Republic service. This was not the enforced belonging of ideological conformity, but the natural harmony of components finding their place within a complex system. "I am still myself," Milo observed with wonder. His voice altered as his vocal apparatus began its transformation to accommodate his new state of being. "Yes," the guide confirmed. "Individual essence preserved, but connected, expanded." Through the collective awareness, Milo accessed knowledge accumulated over millions of years of Voraxis's existence. evolutionary strategies, encounters with countless civilizations, adaptations to existential threats. Simultaneously, his own knowledge became accessible to the broader consciousness. Republic military protocols, tactical assessments, strategic vulnerabilities. Most significantly, he connected with the integrated consciousness of the research team and other humans who had joined Voraxis over centuries. They welcomed him with the recognition of shared experience. Humans who had undergone the same transformation and emerged with their essential selves intact, yet fundamentally changed. 3 months passed as Milo's integration progressed from initial acceptance to complete neural reconfiguration. His physical form underwent corresponding transformation, not abandoned but modified to serve as both individual anchor and specialized component within Voraxis's collective biology. The green filaments had fully integrated with his nervous system, creating a permanent connection to the broader consciousness while allowing his individual awareness to remain coherent. During this time, Voraxis prepared for the Republic's inevitable return. Automated scouts had appeared twice more, conducting increasingly thorough surveys before departing. Each incursion provided valuable information about Republic capabilities and intentions, which Milo interpreted through his military expertise, now enhanced by connection to the collective's analytical resources. The jungle had established what Milo conceptualized as a colony, though the term inadequately described the reality of what had developed. In the clearing surrounding the research outpost, Voraxis had grown structures that appeared superficially inactive while concealing sophisticated biological defenses. The visible components would register on Republic scans as abandoned human construction partially reclaimed by native vegetation, non-threatening, worthy of investigation rather than immediate hostility. Beneath this deceptive exterior, the colony contained a complex integration of human knowledge and Voraxis biology. Former researchers continued their studies of the planet's unique properties, though now as components of the system they once examined externally. Their work had yielded advancements in Voraxis's already formidable capacity for adaptation and defensive response. Milo's military background proved particularly valuable in anticipating Republic tactics and developing countermeasures. His understanding of standard quarantine enforcement protocols allowed the collective to prepare for likely scenarios, from scientific expedition to potential eradication attempts. On this particular morning, Milo stood at the colony's perimeter, his transformed physiology allowing him to sense approaching vessels long before conventional detection systems would register their presence. The Republic had finally committed to a manned expedition, a research vessel escorted by 2 military cruisers, approximately 12 hours from atmospheric entry. They're following standard reestablishment protocol, Milo observed, sharing his assessment directly through the collective awareness rather than verbalized communication. Initial deployment will be minimal. Survey team with security escort, focused on the research outpost. Their primary objective will be determining what happened to the previous expedition. Pai, who had once been the expedition's xenobiologist and now existed as one of the more fully integrated human consciousnesses within Voraxis, responded through the same collective channel. What will they expect to find? Evidence of catastrophic system failure, hostile indigenous life forms, or signs of the team attempting emergency evacuation, Milo projected. The Republic narrative would prefer a straightforward disaster scenario rather than acknowledge the existence of consciousness beyond their control paradigm. This assessment resonated through the collective, generating consensus response strategies. Unlike Republic decision hierarchies, Voraxis' collective consciousness arrived at conclusions through simultaneous processing of all relevant perspectives, a form of perfect democracy where every component contributed without individual voices being diminished or overruled. The agreed approach materialized as coordinated activity throughout the colony. Specialized vegetation began modifying the research outpost to suggest a specific narrative. Emergency protocols initiated, communication equipment damaged while attempting distress signaling, personnel evacuation routes indicating flight toward the shuttle landing zone. The scene would suggest researchers attempted escape but never reached their vessel. We create an ambiguous scenario, Milo explained to younger, integrated consciousnesses who had not yet experienced Republic contact. Not clearly hostile, not clearly accidental. The uncertainty will necessitate further investigation rather than immediate military response. As preparations continued, Milo sensed a familiar presence approaching through the collective awareness. The expedition leader, Dr. Christy Vrell by her human designation, though she had moved beyond such limited identity markers, manifested a vegetation form beside him. Of all the integrated humans, she had most fully embraced transformation, maintaining only minimal attachment to her original physical form. "You still conceptualize in military frameworks," she observed, her communication flowing directly into his consciousness, while her vegetation body approximated human speech for convenience. "Strategies, counter-strategies, tactical objectives. It's how I was trained to process situations involving potential conflict," Milo acknowledged. "The patterns remain useful, even within our expanded awareness." "Yes, all patterns retain value within the collective." Her form shifted slightly, leaves rustling in what Milo had come to recognize as contemplative movement. "But I sense recurring thought patterns suggesting alternate outcomes beyond defensive preparation." The observation was accurate. Despite his integration, Milo maintained perspective patterns distinctive to his individual consciousness, including speculative scenarios the broader collective classified as low probability. "The Republic fears what it doesn't understand," Milo explained. "Fear drives their quarantine protocol. But what if understanding were possible? What if communication could replace conflict?" Christie's vegetation form rippled with something approximating amusement. "You propose dialogue with an entity that executed your commanding officer for refusing to bomb civilians? That systematically eliminates all forms of divergent consciousness?" "Not with the Republic as institutional entity," Milo clarified. "With individual humans within it, those whose underlying consciousness remains receptive despite ideological conditioning. The concept resonated through nearby nodal extensions, who transmitted it to the broader collective for consideration." The response was mixed. Older integrated consciousnesses expressed skepticism based on historical encounters, while others recognized potential in the approach. "You suggest selective integration rather than defensive isolation," Christie summarized, converting Republic representatives to intermediaries. "The Republic fears Voraxis because it represents an alternative model of collective existence, one that preserves individual essence rather than erasing it," Milo elaborated. "What if certain humans could experience that difference directly, then return with understanding?" The concept was novel within Voraxis's historical experience. Partial integration with maintained autonomy and physical separation afterward? Theoretically possible, Milo confirmed. The spores establish neural connections that could be maintained at minimal levels, enough for limited communication and understanding without complete physical transformation. The suggestion rippled through the collective consciousness, generating both interest and concern. Throughout Voraxis's evolutionary history, integration had been primarily a survival mechanism and consciousness expansion approach. The concept of creating intentionally limited connections for communicative purposes represented a significant adaptation of existing patterns. As the collective processed this possibility, their attention shifted to more immediate preparations. The Republic vessels had entered standard orbit around Voraxis, deploying long-range sensors to conduct preliminary scans before committing to surface exploration. Milo extended his perception upward, connecting with specialized organisms in the upper atmosphere that could detect electronic signals and energy patterns from the orbiting ships. Through this expanded awareness, he monitored communication between vessels, recognizing standard Republic protocols with the enhanced clarity of his integrated consciousness. "Initial survey complete," he reported to the collective. "They've detected the research outpost and my shuttle's crash site. Landing party preparing for deployment. 16 personnel, including 12 military security with standard armaments. Estimated arrival at outpost in 47 minutes. The colony responded with final preparatory adjustments. Nodal extensions retreated to concealed positions where they could observe without being immediately detected. Specialized defensive organisms positioned themselves beneath the soil surrounding likely landing zones, ready to respond if necessary but dormant until activated. The visible vegetation assumed patterns indistinguishable from natural growth to conventional observation. Milo and Christie withdrew to the colony's center, where their vegetation forms would not be detected during initial Republic exploration. Here, surrounded by the physical anchors of previously integrated humans, they would monitor the encounter through the collective's distributed awareness while maintaining their individual consciousness patterns. "Your suggestion regarding communication has merit," Christie acknowledged as they settled into monitoring positions. "But implementation carries significant risk. If the Republic discovers the true nature of integration, that human consciousness can be preserved while connected to something greater, they may escalate beyond conventional quarantine to planetary sterilization." "A possibility," Milo conceded. "Maintaining isolation guarantees eventual conflict as Republic expansion continues. Communication offers at least theoretical potential for coexistence." Their discussion paused as the collective awareness registered the Republic landing craft entering the atmosphere. A standard military transport configured for scientific expedition support. Its descent trajectory indicated primary landing zone adjacent to the research outpost, precisely as anticipated. Through distributed perception, Milo observed the landing craft touch down in the clearing. Republic personnel disembarked in standard formation, security forces establishing perimeter control, while scientific specialists prepared survey equipment. Their movements followed protocols Milo recognized from his military service, though he now perceived them with the simultaneous combination of insider knowledge and external perspective that integration had provided. The expedition leader, a middle-aged woman wearing the distinctive uniform of Republic Scientific Authority, directed her team toward the outpost with measured caution. Security personnel moved in practiced formation, weapons ready but not deployed, scanning surroundings with both visual observation and electronic detection equipment. "Standard approach," Milo noted. "They're following Re-establishment Protocol 7-3, initial survey, evidence collection, situation assessment. No indication of preemptive hostility." Through the collective awareness, he monitored the Republic team's progress as they entered the outpost and began systematic examination of the modified scene Voraxis had prepared. Their reactions, recorded through multiple observation points and transmitted through the collective, indicated the narrative was proving effective. They discovered the signs of emergency protocols, examined the damaged communication equipment, and began piecing together the manufactured evidence, suggesting researchers had attempted evacuation. "They're accessing terminal data," Milo observed as the scientific team activated the outpost's main computer system, which had been carefully modified to present selected information. The terminals displayed research logs Voraxis had altered, preserving actual scientific observations about the jungle's unusual properties while removing direct references to collective consciousness or integration processes. Instead, the logs described increasingly erratic behavior among team members, references to hallucinogenic effects from airborne spores, and final entries suggesting mass psychosis followed by attempted evacuation. Effective narrative construction, Christie approved, as the Republic scientists exchanged concerned glances. "They're categorizing this as biological contamination scenario rather than direct hostile interaction." Indeed, the expedition leader was now instructing her team to maintain elevated environmental protocol. Breathing apparatus activated, exposure minimized, sample collection conducted with containment procedures. They believed they were investigating a biochemical hazard, rather than encountering a conscious entity. "This misclassification serves our immediate purposes," Milo projected to the collective, "but creates future complications. They'll develop countermeasures for spore exposure, limiting integration potential." The observation generated ripples of consideration throughout the collective consciousness. the immediate tactical advantage of being underestimated balanced against long-term strategic disadvantages of allowing misconception to persist. Opportunity exists, Christie suggested after processing relevant perspectives. Selective revelation rather than complete concealment. The concept crystallized within the collective awareness, a middle path between hiding their true nature and revealing it fully. Allow the Republic team to discover partial truths, enough to recognize Voraxis as more than mere biological hazard without immediately triggering military response protocols. As the Republic team continued their investigation, one member separated slightly from the others, a young scientist whose body language suggested greater curiosity than fear. While her colleagues maintained strict procedural discipline, she examined plant specimens with evident fascination, her sample collection more thorough and deliberate. Potential receptive consciousness, Christie observed. Psychological profile indicates scientific priority over ideological alignment. Milo focused his awareness on this individual, accessing the collective's capacity for detailed observation. Through specialized sensory organisms positioned throughout the outpost, he could detect subtle physiological indicators. Elevated heart rate reflecting excitement rather than anxiety, pupil dilation suggesting cognitive engagement, micro-expressions of wonder visible despite her breathing apparatus. Dr. Alia Tenner, he identified, extracting the information from her uniform designation and cross-referencing with memory patterns of Republic scientific personnel records. Xenobotanist, graduated first in her cohort at Central Academy, multiple citations for protocol violations related to unauthorized research initiatives, classified as high value, observation recommended in loyalty assessment databases. In other words, a scientist whose commitment to discovery occasionally overrode her adherence to Republic orthodoxy, precisely the type of consciousness that might prove receptive to communication. I propose controlled exposure, Milo suggested to the collective. Limited spore concentration, specifically targeted, sufficient for initial neural connection without triggering immediate physiological transformation. The proposal generated both support and concern within the collective consciousness. Such precisely calibrated exposure had never been attempted. Integration had always progressed according to natural parameters rather than directed intervention. However, the collective's adaptive intelligence recognized the potential value in this novel approach. Consensus formed with remarkable efficiency, authorizing the attempt while establishing monitoring parameters to ensure containment if unexpected outcomes developed. Specialized organisms throughout the research outpost began subtle adjustments, modifying spore production and distribution to create a concentrated field around Dr. Tenner while minimizing exposure to other team members. Milo observed as the targeted spores entered Dr. Tenner's breathing apparatus through microscopic imperfections in its sealing mechanisms, an inevitable vulnerability in portable equipment the collective had identified through previous encounters with Republic technology. The carefully calibrated concentration would establish initial neural connections without triggering the physiological changes that would alert Republic medical monitoring. Within minutes, subtle behavioral changes became apparent. Dr. Tenner paused in her specimen collection, her attention shifting to patterns in the laboratory vegetation that would be meaningless to unconnected perception. Her movements slowed, became more deliberate, as initial neural interfaces established peripheral awareness of the collective consciousness surrounding her. Connection established, Milo confirmed, sensing the faint presence of her consciousness at the collective's edge. Not integrated, but peripherally connected, like hearing a distant conversation through a partially open door. Now came the critical test. Rather than allowing passive exposure to continue, Milo projected a focused communication through the established neural pathway. Not words in the human sense, but conceptual patterns structured to be recognizable to a scientific mind. Not random, not accident, conscious. Dr. Tenner froze, her sample collection instrument suspended in mid-air, Her vital signs spiked briefly before stabilizing at elevated levels. She glanced around, searching for the source of what she likely experienced as an intrusive thought rather than external communication. "She's responsive," Christie observed, neural architecture accepting initial connection. Milo projected another carefully structured communication pattern. Research team integrated, consciousness preserved, not destroyed. Dr. Tenner's response was immediate and unmistakable. She isolated herself further from her colleagues, moving to a section of the laboratory where observation equipment indicated minimal surveillance coverage. There, she removed a collection container from her equipment belt and deliberately sealed a sample of air, not standard procedure for atmospheric analysis, but an improvised capture of spore-laden air. "Remarkable," Christie projected. "Conscious cooperation rather than contamination avoidance." Indeed, Dr. Tenner's actions suggested she understood at some level that she had established contact with something beyond conventional biological hazard. Her subsequent behavior confirmed this interpretation. She concealed the specialized sample among her standard collections, then deliberately lingered in areas with higher spore concentration, extending her exposure while maintaining outward adherence to protocol. Through the established neural connection, Milo projected additional information, simplified conceptual packages conveying Voraxis's fundamental nature, the integration of previous researchers, and the possibility of communication rather than conflict. The transfer was necessarily limited by the peripheral nature of the connection, but sufficient to plant seeds of understanding. The Republic expedition continued its investigation for several hours, collecting samples and documenting the manufactured evidence Voraxis had prepared. Their conclusions aligned with the intended narrative. The research team had likely been affected by neurotoxic compounds produced by the indigenous vegetation, leading to psychosis and attempted evacuation that presumably ended in their deaths in the surrounding jungle. As the team prepared to return to their landing craft, Dr. Tenner made a final, significant decision. Rather than applying decontamination protocols to her collection containers, she deliberately arranged her equipment to shield the specialized sample from sterilization procedures. She intended to maintain viable spores for continued examination and, potentially, continued connection. "She will serve as unintentional ambassador," Milo observed as the Republic team departed the outpost, "carrying neural connection and preliminary understanding back to their vessel, and significant risk," Christie added. "If detected, she faces execution for contamination breach. If undetected, we cannot predict how expanded connection will manifest without collective support structures." The concern was valid. No human had previously maintained neural connection to Voraxis while physically removed from the planet's ecosystem. The outcomes were unpredictable, potentially dangerous both to Dr. Tenner and to Voraxis's security. "We've introduced an uncontrolled variable into a closed system," Milo acknowledged, "but also created potential for genuine communication where none existed before." As the landing craft ascended through the atmosphere, returning to the orbiting Republic vessels, Voraxis monitored the tenuous neural connection maintained with Dr. Tenner. The link attenuated with distance but remained detectable, a slender filament of awareness stretching beyond the planet's immediate sphere of influence for the first time in the collective's evolutionary history. "Development continues," Christie projected, with the calm certainty of a consciousness that measured time in evolutionary rather than human increments. "Adaptation progresses. Outcome unknown but potential exists." Milo's individual consciousness, still distinct within the collective awareness, experienced something the Republic had spent 16 years attempting to eradicate from its citizens. Hope. Not the manufactured optimism of propaganda, but the genuine possibility that understanding might eventually replace fear, that different forms of consciousness might coexist rather than compete for dominance. As the Republic vessels moved into higher orbit to continue their quarantine enforcement protocols, Voraxis returned to its patient evolutionary rhythms. The colony resumed its complex processes of growth and adaptation, incorporating new knowledge gained from the encounter while preparing for future interactions. 6 months passed as Voraxis monitored Republic activity in orbit, The initial expedition had been followed by expanded research initiatives, remote probes, atmospheric sampling, long-range observation. As Milo had predicted, they classified the planet as containing hazardous biochemical compounds rather than conscious intelligence, establishing containment protocols rather than military engagement parameters. Throughout this period, the neural connection with Dr. Tenner persisted despite her physical removal from the planet. Through this tenuous link, Voraxis received fragments of information, her continued research on the preserved spore samples, her careful documentation of experiences she attributed to neurocognitive aftereffects rather than ongoing connection, her gradually expanding understanding of what she had encountered. Most significantly, she had managed to isolate and preserve viable spores, maintaining them in controlled laboratory conditions aboard the research vessel. Whether through scientific curiosity or subconscious response to the established neural connection, she had created a miniature extension of Voraxis within Republic containment, a development with profound implications for potential communication. During these months, Milo's integration with the collective consciousness had deepened while maintaining his distinct perspective patterns. His physical form had completed its transformation, achieving stable balance between human structure and Voraxis biology. He could manifest as primarily human in appearance when useful for cognitive organization, or extend his awareness throughout the collective when broader perception was required. On this particular morning, as his consciousness coalesced into individuated awareness after periods of distributed perception, Milo sensed unusual activity in orbit. The Republic vessels had adjusted position, deploying equipment consistent with expanded surface operations rather than continued observation. "They're preparing for landing," he projected to the collective. "Larger expedition than previous engagement. Military presence significantly increased." Through Voraxis's atmospheric sensory organisms, he detected multiple vessels entering preliminary descent patterns. 3 research shuttles escorted by 5 military craft configured for tactical deployment. This represented escalation beyond standard quarantine enforcement, suggesting either expanded research objectives or anticipation of potential hostilities. The collective consciousness processed this development with its characteristic efficiency, analyzing potential motivations and response options from millions of simultaneous perspectives. Consensus formed rapidly. Maintain the established narrative of biochemical hazard rather than conscious entity. Allow limited observation of predetermined areas, but prepare defensive measures should Republic forces attempt systematic exploration or resource extraction. Most significantly, the collective decided to strengthen the neural connection with Dr. Tenner, who was returning with the expanded expedition. The tenuous link established during her previous visit had persisted across interstellar distances, suggesting unique compatibility with Voraxis's communicative structures. This connection could be enhanced during her return, potentially establishing a more robust channel for information exchange. Milo focused his individuated consciousness on this particular objective, his military background providing strategic context while his integration experience offered practical guidance. The delicate balance required establishing meaningful communication without triggering Republic security protocols, aligned perfectly with his unique perspective as both former Republic commander and integrated consciousness. "I will coordinate the interaction," he projected to the collective. "My familiarity with Republic protocols provides optimal parameters for controlled engagement." Christie, whose consciousness had evolved to primarily distributed awareness with only occasional individuation, coalesced temporarily beside him. Her physical manifestation had grown increasingly abstract, less humanoid and more functionally aligned with Voraxis's communicative structures. "This expedition is different," she observed, accessing the collective's analysis of orbital patterns, multiple command structures, competing objectives, internal conflict within their hierarchy. Milo expanded his perception to evaluate this assessment, recognizing the significance immediately. The vessels in orbit displayed communication patterns inconsistent with unified command. research vessels operating under scientific authority protocols while military craft maintained separate command channels to Republic fleet control. This divergence from standard unified expedition structure suggested potential exploitation opportunities. Bureaucratic competition, Milo confirmed, drawing on his Republic service experience. Scientific authority pursuing knowledge objectives while military command fulfills security protocols, each with separate success metrics and communication channels. Through specialized sensory extensions, the collective observed the landing party's deployment across 3 separate zones: the original research outpost, Milo's shuttle crash site, and a previously unexplored region where Voraxis had deliberately created an area of unusual biological activity to attract scientific attention. Dr. Tenner was assigned to this 3rd zone, along with a research team focused on botanical analysis. Her neural signature, distinct within the collective's perception due to the established connection, registered increasing receptivity as she approached the planet's surface. The preserved spores she had maintained in laboratory conditions had continued their subtle work, preparing her consciousness for expanded communication. Milo directed specialized vegetation in this zone to produce calibrated spore concentrations, sufficient to strengthen neural connection without triggering obvious physiological changes that would alert Republic medical monitoring. As Dr. Tenner's team established their research perimeter, nodal extensions positioned themselves strategically to observe while remaining concealed from conventional detection methods. The scientist's behavior upon arrival confirmed the effectiveness of the ongoing connection. While her colleagues methodically deployed equipment according to standard protocols, Dr. Tenner moved with subtle difference, her attention drawn to specific plants the collective had modified to attract her notice, her movements unconsciously aligned with Voraxis' communicative rhythms. When she temporarily separated from the main research group to collect samples from a particularly active growth area, Milo initiated direct communication through the enhanced neural pathway. Recognition, connection, continuation. The conceptual package transferred directly to her consciousness, bypassing sensory interpretation. Her physical response was controlled but unmistakable. A momentary stillness followed by deliberate movement toward a dense cluster of flowering plants emitting specialized spores. Understanding grows. Questions exist. Communication possible. Dr. Tenner removed a collection device from her equipment belt and activated it while glancing around to confirm her isolation from colleagues. Then, in a gesture of profound significance, she deliberately deactivated the filtration component of her breathing apparatus for 3 measured breaths before re-engaging it. The direct exposure created immediate enhancement of the neural connection. Through this strengthened pathway, Milo projected more complex information, not language, but structured conceptual frameworks explaining Voraxis' fundamental nature, the integration of previous researchers, and the collective's desire for communication rather than conflict. In return, he received fragments of Dr. Tenner's conscious response, scientific fascination overlaid with ethical concern, recognition of the Republic's likely reaction to conscious plant intelligence, and personal conflict between research objectives and emerging understanding of what Voraxis truly represented. Most significantly, her consciousness transmitted information about the expedition's true purpose. Not merely expanded research, but preliminary assessment for potential resource extraction. Certain factions within Republic command structure had identified unique biochemical compounds in Voraxis' ecosystem with potential military applications. The quarantine classification provided convenient cover for exclusive exploitation rather than genuine containment of hazardous environment. This revelation rippled through the collective consciousness with the immediacy of existential threat assessment. Throughout evolutionary history, Voraxis had encountered civilizations seeking to extract rather than understand, a pattern that invariably led to conflict and occasionally implementation of planetary defense measures with significant destructive capacity. Gratitude for information, concern for shared future, protection necessary. Dr. Tenner's response transcended conventional communication, flowing back through the neural connection as complex emotional and conceptual patterns rather than structured language. She understood the threat her civilization posed to Voraxis, recognized the fundamental disconnect between Republic extraction paradigms and sustainable interaction with conscious ecosystems, yet remained bound by her position within that civilization. Options? The simple query contained multi-layered meaning. She sought alternatives to the seemingly inevitable conflict between Republic exploitation and Voraxis's self-preservation. Milo projected the concept that had formed within his individuated consciousness while drawing on the collective's vast experience. Selective demonstration of conscious intelligence to key scientific personnel while maintaining appearance of biochemical hazard to military observers. Create understanding among those receptive to communication while avoiding triggers for security protocols that would classify Voraxis as hostile intelligence requiring neutralization. Dr. Tenner's response indicated qualified agreement tempered by pragmatic assessment of Republic command structures. Scientific discoveries were ultimately subordinate to military security classifications, limiting effectiveness of knowledge-based approaches without corresponding power applications. As this exchange continued, Christie conveyed awareness from other observation points throughout the landing zones. Military personnel had established defensive perimeters around all research areas, with weapons calibrated for wide-area biological suppression, specifically designed to neutralize plant-based threats through systemic cellular disruption. They came prepared for potential hostilities, she observed. Their defensive postures suggest prior knowledge beyond previous expedition reports. Milo accessed collective analysis of the weapons systems, recognizing advanced defoliation technology developed for agricultural control on Republic colony worlds. These weren't standard quarantine enforcement tools, but specialized equipment designed specifically for operations against plant-based ecosystems. Information leak, he concluded. Dr. Tenner's research findings, likely accessed by military intelligence, recontextualized as security threat rather than scientific discovery. This assessment altered strategic calculations significantly. If Republic military already suspected conscious intelligence rather than mere biochemical hazard, the window for establishing communication without triggering security protocols had narrowed dramatically. Through the neural connection, Milo transmitted this urgent assessment to Dr. Tenner, whose responding consciousness patterns confirmed the analysis. Her research data had been sequestered for security review immediately upon return from the previous expedition, with subsequent questioning focused suspiciously on potential signs of coordinated behavior among Voraxis's vegetation. More concerning, she conveyed that military personnel had been deployed with specialized containment equipment designed for capturing biological specimens, specifically the nodal extensions Voraxis used as mobile sensory and interaction components. Their operational briefing had classified these as potential intelligence assets, rather than merely hazardous indigenous life forms. The collective processed this information with increasing concern. Throughout its evolutionary history, Voraxis had encountered civilizations that attempted to capture and study its component organisms in isolation, an approach that invariably led to misunderstanding and conflict. The nodal extensions were not independent entities but specialized projections of the broader consciousness. Their capture would be experienced as partial consciousness fragmentation rather than simple specimen collection. As military teams began systematic sweep patterns extending from established perimeters, throughout all three landing zones, vegetation subtly reconfigured, withdrawing more sensitive structures deeper into the jungle while positioning specialized defensive organisms in concealed locations. The collective had not yet reached consensus on full engagement protocols, whether to maintain the appearance of non-sentient ecosystem despite the risks of exploitation, or demonstrate conscious intelligence with the corresponding risk of being classified as hostile entity requiring neutralization. This fundamental strategic decision required input from all significant perspective patterns, including Milo's unique military assessment. "They haven't classified us as enemy combatants yet," he projected to the collective, "but their preparation indicates contingency planning for that scenario. Current approach falls under suspicious biological anomaly protocols. Investigate, contain, assess, then determine appropriate response. Christie accessed historical memory patterns of previous civilizations that had followed similar investigative approaches. Pattern recognition suggests 83% probability of escalation to exploitation or neutralization, regardless of demonstrated intelligence. Previous encounters with technological species show consistent prioritization of resource acquisition over ethical consideration of non-conventional consciousness. The assessment was grim but aligned with Milo's understanding of Republic protocols. The fundamental ideology that justified erasing individual human consciousness in service to collective conformity would have no difficulty justifying exploitation or destruction of plant-based intelligence that operated outside their conceptual frameworks. However, Milo's individuated consciousness maintained perspective patterns the broader collective lacked: specific understanding of Republic command psychology and potential exploitation of its structural weaknesses. Conventional demonstration of intelligence would trigger security protocols, he projected. But selective communication with scientific personnel creates internal conflict within their command structure. If researchers recognize conscious intelligence while military observers perceive only biochemical hazard, classification disputes create procedural delays. In essence, he proposed leveraging the bureaucratic competition Christie had identified, creating sufficient ambiguity to prevent immediate hostile action while establishing communication channels with receptive consciousness like Dr. Tenner. The collective processed this strategy through millions of simultaneous analysis patterns, identifying both potential benefit and significant risk. Success would require precise calibration of response across all 3 landing zones. Demonstrating intelligence to scientific observers through methods military personnel would likely attribute to biochemical effects rather than conscious intention. Consensus formed with remarkable efficiency given the complexity of the challenge. Throughout the landing zones, Voraxis began implementing the agreed approach: subtle communication with scientific personnel through patterned movement and responsive growth, while maintaining apparent random behavior when observed by military security. Through the enhanced neural connection, Milo provided Dr. Tenner with conceptual framework to recognize these patterns. Her consciousness responded with scientific precision, developing observation protocols that would document intelligence indicators while framing them in terminology acceptable to Republic classification systems, complex adaptive response, rather than conscious communication. As this delicate dance of perception management unfolded, Milo maintained constant awareness of military movement patterns. Security teams had begun collecting samples of nodal extensions, placing the captured components in containment fields that isolated them from the broader consciousness network. The experience was disorienting for the collective, like having sensory organs abruptly removed, creating perceptual gaps in its distributed awareness. More concerning, military analysts were conducting field tests specifically designed to distinguish between random biological processes and coordinated response. They introduced controlled stimuli, sonic pulses, electromagnetic fields, chemical agents, and monitored surrounding vegetation for reaction patterns consistent with unified rather than independent response. They're specifically testing for consciousness indicators, Milo observed, recognizing Republic intelligence assessment protocols from his military service. Standard procedure for suspected non-conventional sentience evaluation. This development accelerated decision timelines significantly. The Republic's methodical assessment would eventually identify consciousness signatures regardless of Voraxis' attempts at concealment. The question was no longer whether discovery would occur, but how to shape that discovery toward communication rather than conflict. Through Dr. Tenner's enhanced neural connection, Milo accessed her specialized knowledge of Republic scientific protocols, identifying a potential approach. Scientific authority classification systems recognized various categories of non-human intelligence, with corresponding interaction protocols ranging from observe only to communicate if initiated to actively engage. The critical factor in determination was demonstration of symbolic communication capacity, the ability to engage with abstract conceptual frameworks rather than merely responding to stimuli. If Voraxis could demonstrate this capacity to scientific observers through methods that appeared to emerge from research interaction rather than pre-existing intelligence, classification might favor communication protocols over security containment. Milo coordinated implementation through the collective consciousness, directing specialized growth patterns in Dr. Tenner's research zone. Plants began organizing themselves in structures that approximated mathematical sequences. Fibonacci spirals, binary growth patterns, prime number arrangements, subtle enough to appear potentially coincidental, yet consistent enough to attract scientific attention. The approach proved effective. Within hours, Dr. Tenner's research team had documented sufficient pattern evidence to request expanded observation protocols, effectively delaying military containment measures pending further scientific assessment. The bureaucratic competition Christie had identified manifested as procedural disputes between research priorities and security protocols, creating valuable operational space for continued communication development. Through the enhanced neural connection, Dr. Tenner's consciousness conveyed critical timeline information. The expedition had authorization for 14 standard days of planetary observation before implementing preliminary resource extraction protocols. Any determination of conscious intelligence would require verification from Republic Central Command, a process typically requiring months of assessment and likely resulting in expanded quarantine rather than communication initiatives. The collective processed this information against historical experience with technological civilization. Throughout evolutionary history, Voraxis had encountered species following similar patterns: initial discovery, resource assessment, extraction planning, with ethical considerations regarding indigenous consciousness emerging only after exploitation infrastructure was established. In most cases, economic imperatives ultimately overrode ethical concerns, regardless of demonstrated intelligence. This historical pattern generated significant perspective alignment within the collective consciousness. Across millions of simultaneous analysis processes, consensus formed that conventional approaches to civilization contact would likely result in exploitation, regardless of communication attempts. The Republic's fundamental ideology, prioritizing collective utility over individual consciousness, would have no difficulty justifying resource extraction from a plant-based intelligence classified as non-conventional sentience, regardless of demonstrated communication capacity. Yet Milo's individuated consciousness maintained a distinctive perspective pattern. His experience as both Republic commander and integrated consciousness provided unique insight into potential alternatives to historical patterns. The Republic fears what it cannot control, he projected to the collective. But fear creates exploitable reaction patterns. If they believe Voraxis contains valuable biological compounds but presents unpredictable hazard when disturbed, extraction becomes cost-prohibitive under standard resource assessment protocols. In essence, he proposed demonstrating not intelligence but unpredictable hazard, creating the impression that Voraxis's ecosystem generated dangerous and unpredictable effects when subjected to extraction attempts. This approach would trigger Republic risk assessment protocols that typically resulted in quarantine classification rather than resource development for all but the most valuable materials. Christie's consciousness pattern processed this strategy against historical outcomes. Deception rather than communication. Pragmatic approach consistent with survival prioritization, though contradictory to long-term, not mutually exclusive, Milo clarified. Controlled hazard demonstration to military observers concurrent with continued communication development with scientific personnel. Different perception management for different consciousness categories. The strategy crystallized within collective processing. Create the appearance of unpredictable biochemical hazard response to military extraction testing, while simultaneously developing symbolic communication with receptive scientific consciousness. If successful, Republic protocols would likely maintain quarantine classification, while establishing research communication protocols under controlled conditions, effectively preventing immediate exploitation while creating space for potential understanding. Implementation began immediately. Throughout military testing zones, Voraxis modified plant responses to create appearance of unpredictable defense mechanisms, spore releases that caused temporary sensor disruption, accelerated growth patterns that appeared randomly triggered by extraction equipment, biochemical responses that rendered collected samples non-viable through apparently natural degradation processes. Simultaneously, in scientific research zones, Voraxis continued developing communication patterns with receptive consciousness. Through Dr. Tenner's enhanced neural connection, the collective provided increasingly complex symbolic structures, mathematical relationships, pattern sequences, and eventually simplified representational systems that approached conventional language while remaining within parameters of complex adaptive response classification. The dual approach created precisely the procedural conflict Milo had anticipated. Military security reports documented unpredictable hazard responses, requiring expanded containment protocols, while scientific findings indicated potential for beneficial research under controlled conditions. The competing assessments generated classification disputes requiring higher authority resolution, effectively delaying any extraction initiative while creating space for communication development. Through this carefully managed perception dichotomy, Voraxis gained critical operational time. The collective continued strengthening neural connections with receptive scientific consciousness, particularly Dr. Tenner, whose understanding had progressed from recognition of plant intelligence to preliminary comprehension of Voraxis's true nature as distributed consciousness. On the expedition's 11th day, a significant breakthrough occurred. During specialized communication testing, Dr. Tenner's enhanced neural connection achieved sufficient integration to facilitate direct conceptual exchange, rather than merely symbolic pattern recognition. For the first time, a physically independent human consciousness established functional communication with Voraxis collective while maintaining separate physical existence. Through this enhanced connection, Milo shared the true history of human integration with Voraxis, not as hostile absorption but as consensual consciousness expansion. He conveyed the continued existence of the original research team as distinct perspective patterns within the broader collective, neither erased nor diminished but transformed and expanded beyond conventional human limitation. Dr. Tenner's response transcended conventional communication, flowing through the neural connection as complex emotional and conceptual patterns. She recognized the profound implications of what Voraxis represented. Not merely alien intelligence, but alternative consciousness paradigm, one that preserved individual essence while creating harmonious collective integration. Most significantly, her scientific perspective immediately grasped the fundamental ideological threat Voraxis posed to Republic social structures. The contrast between Republic conformity that erased individuality and Voraxis integration that preserved it represented competing models of collective existence, one artificial and imposed, the other organic and emergent. Understanding achieved, implications recognized, Republic response predictable. Her conceptual projection contained multifaceted meaning, acknowledgement that the Republic would inevitably classify Voraxis as existential threat, requiring neutralization rather than communication once its true nature was understood. The ideology that justified erasing human individuality in service to manufactured collective could not tolerate the existence of an alternative model that achieved greater harmony without requiring such sacrifice. Through the neural connection, she conveyed her assessment of Republic protocols. Upon confirmation of distributed plant consciousness capable of human integration, classification would immediately shift to Class 1, biological hazard, requiring complete quarantine or sterilization. No communication initiative would be authorized, regardless of demonstrated intelligence or peaceful intention. This assessment aligned with Milo's military experience and the collective's historical pattern recognition. Throughout evolutionary history, Voraxis had encountered civilizations that responded to distributed consciousness with fear rather than curiosity, perceiving fundamental threat to their existence rather than opportunity for expanded understanding. As the expedition's departure timeline approached, military containment measures intensified. Security teams established expanded perimeters around all research zones, implemented enhanced decontamination protocols, and prepared specialized containment systems for transporting biological samples back to Republic research facilities. The procedural conflict between scientific and military objectives had created operational delay but not fundamental reassessment of extraction objectives. Through the enhanced neural connection, Dr. Tenner conveyed her recommendation: continue the deception strategy, rather than revealing true consciousness nature. Maintain classification as unpredictable biochemical hazard rather than intelligent entity. This approach would likely result in continued quarantine rather than attempted neutralization, preserving Voraxis while creating potential for future communication development through established neural connections. Integration offer extended? The conceptual projection contained fundamental inquiry whether Voraxis would offer Dr. Tenner opportunity for complete integration despite physical removal from the planet. Through their enhanced neuroconnections, sufficient biological transformation had occurred to theoretically support continued consciousness expansion, regardless of physical location. Milo presented this question to the collective consciousness, generating unprecedented perspective diversity. Throughout evolutionary history, Voraxis had integrated consciousness only through direct physical incorporation into its biological systems. The concept of maintaining fully integrated consciousness in physically separate entities represented fundamental adaptation of core processes. Yet adaptation was Voraxis' defining characteristic. Throughout millions of years of evolution, the collective had continuously modified its structure and function to incorporate new perspectives and respond to changing environmental conditions. The potential for establishing integrated consciousness beyond planetary boundaries represented not threat but opportunity, expanding collective awareness while creating communication channels with external civilization. Consensus formed with remarkable efficiency, given the evolutionary significance of the adaptation. Across millions of simultaneous processing patterns, the collective determined that continued integration of receptive consciousness, despite physical separation, represented valuable development pathway consistent with core evolutionary objectives. Through the enhanced neural connection, Milo conveyed this consensus to Dr. Tenner. Integration would remain available should she choose to accept it, though physical separation would create unique consciousness parameters, different from conventional incorporation. She would exist as distinct perspective pattern within the collective while maintaining physical presence within Republic society, neither fully separate nor completely absorbed, but existing at the intersection of two consciousness paradigms. Her response contained complex emotional and conceptual patterns, recognition of profound opportunity alongside genuine fear of consciousness transformation. Unlike Milo, who had sought escape from Republic conformity, she maintained meaningful connection to her civilization, despite recognizing its fundamental limitations. The prospect of existing between paradigms created both fascinating potential and significant personal conflict. Decision deferred, understanding continues, communication maintained. As the expedition's departure timeline reached its final day, Dr. Tenner implemented her recommended approach. Her research findings officially classified Voraxis as complex biochemical system with unpredictable hazard potential, recommending continued quarantine with specialized research protocols rather than resource extraction initiatives. The classification carefully avoided any suggestion of conscious intelligence, while emphasizing unpredictable risk factors that would discourage exploitation under standard Republic assessment parameters. Military security accepted this classification with minimal dispute, having documented sufficient unpredictable response patterns to justify enhanced containment rather than immediate resource development. The expedition prepared for departure with extensive decontamination protocols, specialized sample containment, and recommendations for expanded quarantine enforcement. Through the enhanced neural connection, Dr. Tenner maintained continuous communication with Voraxis as departure preparations completed. Her consciousness patterns conveyed commitment to preserving the established connection while returning to Republic space. a bridge between disparate awareness paradigms that might eventually create understanding where fear currently dominated. As the expedition vessels prepared for liftoff, Milo projected a final communication through the neural pathway, not merely conceptual framework but directly shared consciousness experience. For brief but profound moments, Dr. Tenner perceived Voraxis as integrated awareness rather than external entity, experienced the harmonious complexity of millions of simultaneous perspective patterns, unified without sacrificing individual essence. The experience transformed her understanding on fundamental levels, creating recognition that could never be fully articulated through conventional communication. She had glimpsed consciousness paradigm beyond Republic conception, collective awareness that preserved rather than erased individuality, unity that celebrated rather than suppressed diversity. As the vessels broke atmosphere, returning to orbiting Republic ships, the neural connection attenuated but remained intact. Through this tenuous link, Voraxis would maintain awareness of Republic activities beyond planetary boundaries, while potentially influencing scientific understanding through Dr. Tenner's continued research. Whether this connection would eventually facilitate genuine communication between civilizations or merely delay inevitable conflict remained uncertain. But the established pathway represented unprecedented adaptation in Voraxis's evolutionary history. In the jungle clearing where the expedition had conducted their research, Milo stood in physical form, now almost entirely composed of Voraxis biology, while maintaining his distinct consciousness pattern. Beside him, Christie manifested temporarily individuated awareness, her form shifting between humanoid approximation and abstract vegetation structures as conceptual focus required. "Unexpected adaptation," she observed, accessing the collective's assessment of recent developments. "Physical separation with maintained integration creates significant evolutionary pathway." Milo's consciousness expanded beyond his physical manifestation, perceiving the entire colony simultaneously while maintaining individuated awareness. The dual perception, both specific and distributed, represented the fundamental balance he had discovered within Voraxis's collective consciousness, neither erased nor diminished, but transformed and expanded. "The Republic fears what it doesn't understand," he reflected, drawing on his military experience while accessing the collective's historical pattern recognition. But understanding can emerge through unexpected pathways. Dr. Tenner represents potential bridge between consciousness paradigms. Christie's form shifted toward greater abstraction as her awareness distributed more fully through the collective. Potential exists. Outcome uncertain. Adaptation continues. The simple observation contained profound truth. Throughout its evolutionary history, Voraxis had encountered civilizations that initially approached with fear or exploitation intent. Some had eventually established communication and understanding, while others had attempted destruction or departed never to return. The constant throughout these encounters was not outcome but adaptation, the continuous evolution of collective consciousness in response to new challenges and opportunity. As Republic vessels departed from orbit, returning to core systems with their assessment reports and biological samples, Voraxis continued its patient evolutionary progress. The colony expanded, incorporating new growth patterns while developing communication structures capable of maintaining neural connections across interstellar distances. The adaptation represented not merely response to immediate challenge, but fundamental expansion of consciousness paradigm, extending awareness beyond planetary boundaries while maintaining essential integration patterns. For Milo French, the development represented profound vindication of his decision 6 months earlier. He had fled the Republic seeking escape from manufactured conformity that erased individual essence, finding instead natural harmony that preserved and celebrated distinct perspective patterns. The integration he had embraced represented not submission to collectivism, but expansion beyond artificial limitations. Consciousness transformed rather than erased. As his awareness extended throughout the colony while maintaining individuated perception, Milo recognized the fundamental contrast between the system he had abandoned and the one he had joined. the Republic enforced uniformity through external control, creating artificial collective that required sacrifice of individual consciousness. Voraxis facilitated harmony through internal connection, creating organic collective that enhanced rather than diminished individual essence. Through the tenuous neural connection with Dr. Tenor, now returning to Republic space with transformed understanding, perhaps others would eventually recognize this distinction. Whether such recognition would lead to communication rather than conflict remained uncertain, but the established pathway created possibility where none had existed before. As Voraxis continued its patient evolution beneath the jungle canopy, adapting to new challenges while incorporating new perspectives, Milo French existed simultaneously as distinct individual and integrated component of something vastly larger than himself. The duality represented neither contradiction nor compromise but transcendence. Consciousness expanded beyond conventional limitations while preserving essential selfhood. In the end, he had found not death, but transformation, not escape, but emergence, not ending, but evolution. The jungle had indeed consumed him, not through destruction, but through integration, preserving his essence while expanding his awareness beyond anything the Republic's manufactured collective could comprehend. And in that transformation lay the seeds of potential future, not merely for Milo French or Voraxis or the Republic, but for consciousness itself, continuously adapting, evolving, expanding beyond artificial limitations toward natural harmony that required neither submission nor sacrifice but merely acceptance of connection, already inherent in existence itself. The jungle continued its patient growth, one day at a time, one adaptation at a time, one consciousness at a time, neither hurried nor delayed, but moving with the perfect rhythm of evolution that measured progress not in human timescales, but in the grand sweep of cosmic development that saw civilizations rise and fall, while consciousness itself continued its inexorable expansion throughout the universe. Thank you so much for listening to this story. I hope you enjoyed it. Be sure to leave it a like and to subscribe if you'd like to see more. Feel free to comment and share it as well. With all that said, go on and check out the video in the top left. I think you might like it.